Welcome everybody. We begin the April 22nd, 2021 meeting of the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency. I want to call to order and a roll call, please. Or I could say there's no physical location for this meeting pursuant to Governor's Executive Order N 29-20. This meeting is held in a remote access format with the following access information. But I could also say call to order and roll call, please. Nick, if you would.
You got it. Friendly reminder, everybody is going to be muted on default. You're probably going to have to unmute yourselves to respond. Director Engfer.
Here.
Director Koenig. Director McPherson. Director Cassidy.
Here.
Director Koopman.
Here.
Director Pollock.
Director Pollock is absent tonight because he had a medical procedure, and they're keeping him for observation. So everyone send good thoughts and positive vibes to Director Dale.
All righty. Director Dillis.
Here.
Director Mayhood.
Here.
Director Smalley.
Here.
Director Stiles.
Here.
Director Perry.
Here.
All right. And one moment here. I just want to double check that the county supervisors have not joined. All right. And alternate directors, Director Baskin. Director Brown. Director Hayes. Director Lind. Director Henry.
Now I saw Lois.
I do believe she's in here. Oh, Lois, I think you're muted.
I am. I'm here.
Excellent. And I have you down as a non-participating observer tonight. I believe I'm going to be moving you to the attendees after roll call, just to double check on that. And lastly, Director Eckwall.
Present.
All right, you as well, sir. And one last check for the county supervisors. Not hearing, not seeing. All right, it appears we have 8 directors present. We have quorum.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Nick. All right, do we have any additions or deletions to the agenda?
There's none from staff.
Okay, hearing none. Can I have oral communications on matters not on this agenda? So that would be anyone from the public or any, I guess, board members, anybody.
And a quick side note, if you're a member of the public joining us tonight, I don't believe anybody's calling in via telephone, but we do use the raise hand function on Zoom in order to identify that you wish to make a public comment. If you wish to make a public comment on this item or any other item of the agenda, go ahead and raise your hand and we will call on you accordingly. Directions will be provided for unmuting. Director Perry, at this time, I'm seeing none.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, so we get down into the work. The informational series, I'm going to turn it over to our facilitator and to Georgina and to everybody. 2.1 GSP roadmap. 2.11.
Okay, good evening, everybody. This is Dave Sepos. I'll be acting as facilitator for this evening, as I commonly do for section 2.1 and all the sections therein. I think Nick has already done some of the basic reminders. We had him in a minute here. I'll be handing things over to Georgina to do, as we commonly do, the review of the roadmap, just to orient people where we are at on the process. Things are beginning to tighten up time-wise, as you well know. Nick, I do notice that Supervisor Koenig has joined us, so I don't know if you've noted that in your notes for the purposes of the record and quorum. Thank you.
Yeah, I have him 534.
Okay, thank you very much. Chris, Director Perry, let me check in with you on one thing. I know that there has been some conversation. I apologize that I had to miss the last agenda setting meeting that you and Gail attended. Do you want me to cover, or were you going to cover some of the proposed further, sort of process revisions that you all have been discussing about how to handle and go through slides and things like that? Or do you want me to handle that this evening as right now? And
You can go ahead, just since we don't bounce back and forth, Dave, just keep the flow going.
Okay, very good. So what I just want to cover, and this came from the agenda setting meeting last week, is obviously all of you as board members are receiving materials in advance. Is that feedback or is that somebody trying to speak? I think it was feedback. You all get the background materials, and obviously the meetings have continued to be long, and we've told you that in part that may be sort of the status quo, but we're always looking for ways, and I know your leadership is looking for ways to minimize that. And one of the ways that was discussed was since everybody does get the materials in advance and has an opportunity to look at slides and review them, that what we're going to be trying to do, not overly aggressively tonight, but I think you will be starting to experience some of this a bit tonight, is that as we go through presentations, the presenters are not going to necessarily linger at length on all the slides. They're going to be sort of drilling into maybe moving over a couple slides. Doesn't mean that we won't come back to them to field questions from you, but we're not necessarily going to go laboriously in the content over every single slide. Doesn't mean all the presentations are going to be like that, because some of them is just really brand new information that we do have to do that. But I am just trying to set the stage that for you all, in an ongoing effort to try to be making things efficient, presenters are going to move a little more quickly through some of the slides. They're going to focus on some of the cut to the chase things. We'll get to the end of a presentation or someplace where we otherwise had built in a pause. We'll take that pause. We'll go ahead and take questions and answers. You are absolutely, as board members and members of the public, welcome to weigh in on any slide, even if it's one that the presenter didn't spend a lot of time on, but you through your prior review had. But the point of this is to try to make sure that when you all are receiving the background materials, you're doing that time on your end. And if you don't really have any questions in advance, then maybe we can just move things a little more swiftly along during presentations. So again, not going to overly burden it today, but just be aware that we're going to continue shifting that way. I'll talk about some of the other process items and focus on things a bit more specifically when we start going into the specific presentations. With that, I'm going to go ahead. I see that Nick has got the roadmap up, so I am going to look to Georgina to kind of take us through this and again orient us as to where we're at.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Good evening, everybody. It's nice and light still outside. I'm enjoying that. So we have a lot of speakers today, actually, more than just me, which is a welcome change for me. But I'm going to start off here with the roadmap that you see in front of you. This is more like the zoomed out view, and we are tonight we're going to be looking at some of the last remaining sustainability management criteria. That's chapter 3 of the GSP. We're also going to be talking about chapter 4, the content of that, which is potential projects and management actions. And then I should also mention we have started working on section 5, the last section of the GSP, which is on implementation plan, how we plan to implement this. So the next time I need to update this to show we are here is a bit longer. It goes out to 5. So next slide, please, Nick. So today we're going to be talking about planning costs of projects, but that's actually going to be the last item. I'm going to cover or try and finish off the groundwater level measurable objective and undesirable results. And then Cameron Tana, after I speak, is going to be talking to you all about the sustainable management criteria for reduction of storage or groundwater in storage. And I had hoped, the last bullet there, that I would hear back from you on the monitoring network, but since you only got that yesterday, there was a hiccup. It should have gone out a fair bit earlier. We're hoping to get comments from you on May 5th, I think now, if you looked at that email. This is quite a technical section. I'm not sure how much comments you will have on it. We did get comments from the agency staff who are responsible for this monitoring. So we have incorporated that into the version you have. In May, next month, we're going to hear from the Communications and Engagement Plan. Miller Maxfield is working on that, and they'll present that. And then we have some resource agency speakers who are going to talk about, and these are from the California Fish and Wildlife and from the Nature Conservancy, are going to talk a bit about their perspective of the indicator, surface water indicator that we have discussed in the past. But it's now you're going to hear from their perspective. I also hope to give you an idea of what's in the GSP implementation section, that chapter 5 I mentioned in the previous slide. And then there's going to be some budget review. And then hopefully there's time to talk about some of the other things you've been reviewing that we'll be sending out. So for example, hopefully next week or the week after, the water budget and sustainable yield are going to come out. So just about every week or every 2 weeks, another part of the GSP is going to come out for review. So this is quite a busy time from now to the end of June with review. Okay, I think that, and then June is when we will mostly be talking about those review items that you've looked at. Okay, that's it, Nick.
Okay, any questions or comments from board members on the schedule? This schedule, I know that we go through this regularly, and it might be a little something to glaze over on, understandably so, but it's going to be a particular note as we get into some of the further conversation tonight, particularly regarding the PMAs and the schedule of getting the GSP done. So we won't be circling back to the actual document, this file or folder graphic, but we will be definitely circling back to the concept of the time frame and schedule. So with that, do we have any questions or comments? I'm not seeing any. So with that, Georgina, I am gonna hand it back over to you to get us going on this.
If I may, this is Perrette Harman. Just for the record, we do have Supervisor McPherson that joined, and also alternate member from City of Scotts Valley, Donna Lind.
Thank you very much, Perrette. As we go into this item, just a note, we will have two moments where near the end or at the end of this, where as we have been doing in the past, we're going to be looking for recommendations from the board and direction to staff. These will not take the form of formal actions, but they will be the method that we have used of late, wherein I will make sure that everybody's very clear on the question, and I will sort of go around the room, so to speak, and check in with each director to get your answer to a particular question, so that staff and the technical team have got the direction that they need to keep things going. So just be aware there are two of them. So with that, Georgina, go ahead.
Okay, I'm muted, right? Okay. Well, here we are. We're back with the measurable objectives and undesirable results from last board meeting. And I'm going to skip a few slides here because that's what we're trying to do if they are not, they don't have too much information in it. For example, the objectives, I think I've covered that, what we're trying to do, revisit measurable objectives of an undesirable results of the confined aquifers, because we did, you all did agree on the Santa Margarita, but the measurable objectives and undesirable results for the Monterey, Lompico, Butana aquifer, we need to look at again. And so these three bullets summarize what I heard from you at last month's meeting, and that using that combined scenario of both the in-lieu and the injection resulted in these kind of too optimistic groundwater levels that were too high and that were overly aspirational. So basing minimum threshold measurable objectives on those seemed a bit unrealistic. And the climate projection has got a 6-year wet period right in the beginning that pushes groundwater levels up. And that was also something to consider. There was preference to use just the in-lieu projection as a basis for the measurable objectives. So we looked at this, and what we tried to do is to find a method that would remove the climate uncertainty, because there was a lot of talk about that last month. And so we came up with a simple solution that actually has been used in other basins as well. In the state, including Pajaro Basin, where you just subtract the projected groundwater levels of the in-lieu and you subtract out the baseline. So if you did nothing, and in the end, it looked like there's about a 20 to 30 foot benefit from the in-lieu project, and that depends. That amount depends how close you are to the wells that are doing the in-lieu recharge. So for this well, it's a monitoring well near the Pacientempo well field. And this is a plot of that difference. So you can see at the beginning of the simulation, there's 0. And as the in-lieu project continues over time, there's more and more of an increase compared to if you did nothing. And this is an increase in groundwater levels. I didn't want to take, so now I had to select something, a number along this line that would represent the benefit that we would use to add to say where the minimum measurable objective would be. So by the year 2042 is when the basin is supposed to achieve sustainability. And so I looked at the average seasonal lows, and the reason why I'm taking the seasonal lows, that's you see, each year has a high point and a low point, and the low point corresponds generally with summer, early fall, where and that's what the minimum threshold is based off. So it makes sense to base the measurable objective on the same thing. And I took the average from 2042 right through the 50-year planning and implementation horizon that we're required to simulate. And I took the average of those seasonal lows, and this well came up with 33 foot of benefit from the in-lieu project. Now, where do we add this 33 feet to? I came up with 2 different options, and this is what we're going to be talking about. Which of these that you think represent what the board wants the basin to achieve as a measurable objective? The first one here is an average of those seasonal lows, the last 5 years, basically 2016 to 2020. Look, taking an average of that and then adding the 33 feet to it. We could also take some period of time, and for example, this is an example, I just took October 2020, which is the beginning of this water year that we're in right now. And the next few charts are going to show you what that looks like when you apply it to four real wells. So the first one is a Lompico aquifer well. It's that same one, Pacientempo monitoring well 1. We have the minimum threshold down here, which is an average of the 5 lowest records, measured records. And the purple line is going to be the average of the past 5 years seasonal lows, and then add the 33 foot benefit. So there you would have your line up the purple dash line over here. If you added that 33 feet to the October 2020 levels, you actually get a lower number. And in all the charts that I'm going to show you, these lines, this is the only one where the purple is on top. And the reason is because San Lorenzo Valley Water District is pumping their wells a little more than they would normally because of the impact to their surface water system from the fires. So the average in this case would definitely be a better option because it kind of evens that out. It doesn't make that so as low as it is right now. So that's one thing to think about. So that's what that looks like. This is the 33-foot benefit added to those two different options. The next one is another Lompico well, Scotts Valley Water District 10, and you see now the purple line is below. And the reason is because that is an average of the last 5 years, which you can see there has been this increase. But within that 5 years, there are also some fairly low levels. But if you just took the October 2020 groundwater levels, you can see the measurable objective is a lot higher because in this area, the Lompico aquifer has been recovering quite nicely. And this well, here's the average of the seasonal lows from 2042 to 42, and it's 22 feet. So it's a little different to the previous well. It's about 10, 11 feet different. This is the only well that we have in the Monterey Formation, well 9, Scotts Valley Water District well 9. It has about 19-foot benefit over that period later on in the simulation. And here you see the lines, the two different options, they're fairly close together. And then as you get further north, I think the next one is the Butano, where there's a well up in this area further north, and that's more distant from where the in-lieu would be happening. You can see that those two lines are almost on top of each other. There's not much difference. And that's also because over the last 5 years, you can see groundwater levels have been fairly constant. So that's why they end up being closer to each other. And, sorry, and this one's also 22 feet. I misspoke. There are some wells, Butano wells in this northern area that would be part of the in-lieu program. So that's why groundwater levels do recover quite nicely up here. Okay, so the approach that I have talked about relies on first determining that benefit, and then second, what do you add that benefit to? And I'd like to hear your views on this. If you like the average of the seasonal lows from the last 5 years, or if you think we should choose a period in time to add it to. Now, the reason I didn't take the minimum threshold, because that was also something I thought about, do we just add it to the minimum threshold? And if I do that, it turns out that in quite a few wells, because of the increasing trend, we actually end up above the measurable objective. So it's not much of a measurable objective. It's nothing, we wouldn't improve things very much. And so that's why I didn't consider that much further than just plotting it on a few and to see what would happen. So the proposal that I have here, maybe we will hear, Dave, do we want to hear first about what people think about these two options? Like to hear views before we get into the proposal.
Yeah, I wanted to go ahead and just open the floor and see if there's any questions or clarification on the prior slides that you've done, and then start seeing if there's any broad feedback. Ruth actually had her hand up earlier and then it went down. So Ruth, I'm just checking back in. Did you want to be in the queue? And if so, then I'll go to you first, and then I'll go to Mark.
Yeah, I might as well answer my question. On these charts, the purple and green dotted lines have no relationship to the purple and green levels on the chart, correct?
Yeah, they do not.
Okay.
All right, great, thank you. Let's go to Mark and then to Jack.
Yes, as to which of these two alternatives, as a scientist, it doesn't make sense to me to pick one observation point and use that to establish what we would have for our measurable objective using the last 5 years gives a reasonable average of what it has been. So that's the way I'm leaning on the choice between these.
Okay, thank you. Jack, let's go ahead.
Yes, I'm leaning the same way for similar reasons. I think it's getting too complicated, but do we have to choose the same measure for each, or could we mix and match? Just a question.
Georgina?
You can mix or match, but it just makes it more complicated when we're evaluating these. You've got to, you've got to remember. It's not just remember; it's written down. But it is better if it is a uniform approach, and that's how we've kind of dealt with all the other SMCs that we've developed.
Okay, I'm fine with that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's go to Jeff, please.
Yeah, one question first. Do we have any idea how much volume of water this represents, these increases?
Yeah, this is the 520 acre feet.
Yeah, that's
average.
Like, but so over a number of years, that would be several thousands of acre feet, right? Total?
Yeah, that's on average. Yeah, so if you did, say, I don't know, over 10 years, that's 5,200. And
so we would end up with maybe several years of storage potentially over the period of the
exactly.
GSP.
That's what we're trying to aim for. Yeah.
Great. Okay, and then I agree, I guess, with the previous two speakers. That average seems like a good case in most cases, but and possibly maybe on the one, if there's an opportunity to do it differently, there might be a reason to do that.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments from?
I'm on a foreign computer here, so I don't know how to do the raise hand function on this one. So I'm physically raising my hand.
No, Chris. If you can't do it electronically,
Okay. I'll be quiet. No, okay. I agree with everyone, everything everyone has said. Even as a lead guitar player, I agree with those things.
I'm sure there's some relevance there somewhere, but I will not digress. Eden, go ahead, please.
Yeah, they seem like okay measurement criteria to me. I'm just want to clarify, we're not measuring Santa Margarita or keeping track of it at all.
No, we dealt with it last month.
That was last month's discussion. But this was the one that got tabled because the board wanted the technical team to come back with a different set of options because they weren't comfortable with the conclusion that the technical team had brought forward.
But the different options are only for the aquifers other than Santa Margarita.
Correct.
Tonight.
Yeah.
All right, are there any other questions or comments from board members? All right, Georgina, we could go ahead and just call the question on this now after I go ahead and open up the floor for public comment, or unless you want me to go straight through the presentation and then double back around. So which would you prefer? Do you have a preference?
For this one, let me, I think I should go into the proposal here.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean.
Okay.
Yeah, let's go into the proposal and then we'll go ahead and get this run to ground, and then we'll move on to the next portion of your presentation.
Right. So the proposal that I have here is not a statement that would be included in the GSP from the board. It's more, this is what I'm going to use to describe the approach to develop the measurable objectives. And what it is that the measurable objectives in the Lompico, Monterey, and Butano aquifer representative monitoring points will equal the projected increase in seasonal low groundwater levels from the 520 acre foot per year in lieu project in the Scotts Valley area over baseline conditions. And that would be added to either the average or this point in time. And the reason why I have in there the project is because I'm trying to associate it to the scenario that was run. And also I mentioned the Scotts Valley area because this project is in the Scotts Valley area. We also only have representative monitoring points for those aquifers in the Scotts Valley area. In the future, if other wells, and we are going to be drilling other wells later this year, monitoring wells in data gap areas into the Lompico and Monterey in places we have not had any information from before, this approach might change, or maybe in those areas we do something different because there are no projects in those areas to raise groundwater levels, but we will have representative monitoring points. So I'm being fairly specific here because I already want to tie it to this area. Those new wells that get put in, they will have eventually, as we get data for them, they will, some of them may become representative monitoring points, and we'll then have to later on, probably in about 5 years or so, have to develop the SMCs for those. So now I'll hand it back to you, Dave.
Okay. So let me just go ahead. I need to confirm our quorum list with Nick. Nick, so what I have in no particular order is for our quorum list, Director Angford, Director Koenig, Director Cassidy, Director Koopman, Director Dills, Director Mahood, Director Smoley, Director Stiles, Director Perry, and Director McPherson. Am I missing anybody?
I believe you're missing Jeff Koopman, and I am getting that list to you right now.
Okay, no, I actually have Koopman, so I apologize if I didn't read that, so thank you. All right, so with that, what we're going to do is, you see before you the proposal, everybody. We've heard from members of the board already weighing in on their preference or their belief. Basically, to what I would like to do is I'm going to open up the floor for one last shot by board member conversation. Then I'm going to open up the floor for public comment. Then I'm going to come to this and I'm going to call the question and just kind of go around the horn as we've talked about it before. So are there any other board member questions? The proposal before you, just to read it: measurable objectives in the Lompico, Monterey, and Butano aquifer RMPs equal the projected increase in seasonal low levels from the 520 AFY in lieu project in the Scotts Valley area over baseline conditions added to either average seasonal lows from 2016 through 2020 or October 2020 groundwater levels. So you're going to answer, I'm going to ask the question, I'm going to ask you to weigh in either on one of those bullets or the other. I'll come back to this in a minute, but that's what's before you. Are there any other questions or comments from board members? Again, using raise hand mode. All right, seeing none and hearing none, then I want to go ahead and check and see if there's any members of the public, Nick, well, let's see if there are any members of the public that wish to weigh in or ask any questions.
Yeah, and just as a reminder here, we do have a few new folks in the attendee pool. If you're an attendee tonight and you wish to make a public comment, go ahead and raise your hand. Use the raise hand function on Zoom. Looks like we do have one person calling in via telephone. There should be a raise hand function. It's either going to be #6 or actually, no, I'm sorry, star 9 for those. Looks like we do have a hand raised, and let's see here. All right, Mr. Cheap, you're on the air.
Good evening, everybody. My apologies. I've missed the last couple meetings, so I'm a little bit rusty and coming up to speed. But I guess the board is being asked to either make a decision on number 1 with some historic references, or number 2, basically going back roughly 12 months and forward. And that's the choice. It seems oddly basic, and I agree with Mr. Smoley's comment relative to history may be more important than present looking forward.
All right, thank you. Okay, I do not see any other comments at this time. So with that, again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around and call out directors by name. And I would like for you to indicate, just for expediency, you can either say average seasonal or October 2020. So just that's what I'm asking you to go ahead and weigh in on. So let's, I'll start with Director Smoley. Director Smoley, average seasonal or October 20?
Average seasonal lows.
Thank you very much. Director Angfer?
Average.
Thank you. Director Cassidy?
Average seasonal lows.
Thank you. Director Mahood?
Average.
Thank you. Director Stiles?
Average.
Thank you. Director Perry?
Average seasonal lows.
Director Koenig?
Average seasonal.
Thank you. Director Koopman,
Average seasonal.
thank you. Director Dills,
Average seasonal.
thank you. And Director McPherson.
Average seasonal.
Very good. As best as I can tell, we have unanimity that all board members present in the quorum are supporting the average seasonal lows. And that is the recommendation from the board and direction from the board. Again, this is not a formal action. I want to be clear that for members of the public, but that is recommendation by the board and direction to staff to continue it. Thank you very much. With that, Georgina, let's continue on.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. The next slide, now we're going to move into the undesirable results. And this is last month when we talked about undesirable results for Santa Margarita, we had quite a lot of discussion. And so I'm going to just start off by pointing out where in this purple blob that I've drawn on the map are really where all the representative monitoring points are for those confined aquifers. The orange dots represent the Lompico wells. There's one gray dot over here that represents Monterey. The blue represents the Butano, and you can see there's not many of those at all. And then there's some green that represent a mix screened in both the Lompico and the Butano. So this is the area that we're talking about. The undesirable results that we're trying to avoid of lowered groundwater levels are different to other parts of the basin in that the in-lieu project that we are talking about, that the measurable objectives are based on, it would be in this area. And as a result, we project that groundwater levels will be between 20 to 30 feet higher due to the in-lieu project. And as I'm sure I didn't point it out, but in the other slides, this magenta line over here represents that in-lieu project. The line below is the baseline, so if you did nothing. And what we see is that the magenta line doesn't get that, in some places it doesn't get close to the minimum threshold at all, and in others, particularly in the northern part of the basin, it does get there close to the measure minimum threshold and even a little bit below. But if you remember, we talked about the groundwater levels not being undesirable in this drought, and in this projection where you have a lot of this brown color indicating critically dry years, going down below the measurable objective in this case, sorry, not the minimum threshold in this case, would not be undesirable. So given that the in-lieu project, once it is established, now here we've said it's going to take 5 years to get going. In reality, it could take 10 years to get going, but groundwater levels recover fairly quickly as soon as that project is implemented. So the proposal that I have is based roughly here, well, basically on the undesirable results for the Santa Margarita aquifer that we talked about last month. And so here I've just substituted the Santa Margarita aquifer. Well, I've added the Lompico, Monterey, and Butano in place of the Santa Margarita. I put in the terminology that was suggested for the second of 2 consecutive non-drought years. I thought about it a lot. It does make sense to me. The first year of non-drought year is okay, but it's the second one consecutively after that one that would be undesirable. And then I added in the second sentence here about the lowered levels in non-drought years, or if the lowered levels in non-drought years are related to an unforeseen event, which may include, but is not limited to, operational issues or emergencies, those levels are not considered undesirable. So as this little box here points out, this is from the Santa Margarita Aquifer undesirable results. I've shown you how the projected groundwater levels don't get that close to the minimum thresholds, except for in the very dry years, where in multiple year droughts that are projected in the projection that we're using. So potentially you could take out what's in bold over here to say that the undesirable results occur in those aquifers if the groundwater levels fall below minimum thresholds in non-drought years. Now, remember that when we are setting the statement, there's a few things that we are trying to achieve. One, we want to make sure the basin is sustainable. Second, we want to give ourselves enough, you need to give the agency enough flexibility to avoid state intervention. And so, you know, also well enough that in the first 20 years of GSP implementation, so from next year on to 2042, if you fall below the minimum threshold, or if you have some of these undesirable results, the state doesn't intervene at all until after 2042, and they can see that the basin needs help. So we can still figure this out a little bit, but it'd be nice to get close on our first attempt. So bear those things in mind as we discuss this proposal before you. And so, you know, the text in bold here is really what's providing flexibility, and we use this in the Santa Margarita because the Santa Margarita can recover quickly when it's wet, but these confined aquifers take much longer to recover naturally. Now, if you reduce pumping, it is seen that groundwater levels do recover fairly quickly, and that's since water demand the patterns have changed since the drought. That's why you see those groundwater levels in the Lompico recovering fairly quickly. Now, if you kept pumping at the same amount that you did pre-drought, and we have the dry conditions that we have now, you would definitely see a decline in groundwater levels. It's only because that increase that you see there is not because it's raining more, it's because less is being pumped out of them. So knowing that you can actually increase levels fairly quickly if you stop pumping, so that would be when there's enough water for in lieu, and hopefully you can recover levels. But we really aren't going to know for sure. This is just, you know, not speculation, but it's based off the modeling that we've done and trying to understand how the basin reacts to different things and looking how it's reacted in the past. This is how we think it's going to react, and we're going to, and as the GSP is implemented, we're going to have to fine tune that understanding. But that's all we have right now. Okay, Dave, before I ramble on too much, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Okay, so what I'd like to do here is, as we commonly do, let's open up the floor for questions, comments, items of clarification. If you choose to weigh in with an opinion about the proposal before you, by all means, go ahead and do so. I'm not going to call the question yet, just want to sort of get the general conversation going. Eventually, I am going to go ahead and call the question, and I will give everybody advance note that when we do that, but in advance of that, ideally, if somebody wishes to bring forward an alternative proposal, would ask that you do that before I go ahead and call the question, and be prepared to not only come forward with your suggestion, but also your rationale as to why you're making a suggestion different from what's here, which, again, not passing judgment on that, just so everybody is putting that rationale out, and in particular, how your suggestion, in your opinion, better serves the interests of the agency. Okay, because again, as JPA members, you have responsibility to be serving the interests and the mission of the agency. But first, let's just start with quick questions and answers for clarification, and then we'll move on to any proposed suggestions about the language you see before you. So, any questions or comments from anybody? Board members, I mean. Eden, go ahead, please.
Hate to be the grammatical or syntax but the word "to" does not need to be in there.
I remember that from last time.
Okay. All right, Georgina, you have control of it. So there we go. So Georgina is going to be prepared to start making some adjustments. Okay. Any other comments, Eden?
I had
Getting to you. Hold on. Director Perry.
Just a question. I remember last time we were talking about the reason we were giving the Santa Margarita a break and not minding if it went below in a drought year was because it recharged so quickly because it was so much closer to the surface, just the nature of it. And I didn't think I thought we were going to hold the Lompico and the Butano to staying above the minimum threshold, even in drought times, because they don't recharge as quickly, maybe especially the Butano. But now I hear you saying that they do. They will recharge that quickly?
No,
They won't recharge as quickly as
No.
the Santa Margarita.
no, they will not.
And that was my recollection of why we were just saying it had to be a non-drought year. That, I mean, is it okay just to let it fall below just because it, shouldn't, that means we haven't built in a resiliency if we're letting it fall below just because there's a drought. I mean, wouldn't sustainability really be that we are having an aquifer that will be able to get through droughts without falling below the minimum threshold? Just asking.
Georgina?
No, that's a good point, and I want everyone to consider that. I didn't want to be too prescriptive because it could go many ways here. I put fairly, if you took out the second consecutive non-drought year, sorry, if you made it as Director Perry just said, where you do not let it fall below the minimum threshold in any year, that is really the most conservative, and there's no flexibility in there.
Well, or I wouldn't say I would just say you could still put a time period. It could be below if there was a drought, but
Okay.
I'm just saying, I'm not saying that's what I want to do. I'm just saying that I had the impression is that's why we went that way with the Santa Margarita, because it was exceptionally quick at recharging. And I didn't know we would go that way with the Butano or the Lompico. I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm just, because flexibility is great and you don't want the state to come stomping down on us, Just
well, Ken, in the queue is Mark and then Eden, but Chris, going back to you for a minute, let me just maybe play devil's advocate a little bit, because are you saying that you see this relatively equivalent to the intent of how the undesirable result is written for Santa Margarita?
No, I'm saying that I understood there was last time we were talking about the Santa Margarita, we were treating it special. So we wouldn't want this one to be as similar in regarding what we thought was a undesirable result, because, it won't just bounce right back after a drought.
Okay.
And also the difference between this and the Santa Margarita is that the project, the In-Lieu project or any other project that happens in the Scotts Valley area is going to be focused in the Lompico aquifer. So the Santa Margarita aquifer doesn't really have a project for it to increase levels. So that's also why they should be different.
Okay, let's go to Mark and then we'll go to Eden.
I agree with this statement as written. It provides us the flexibility that would not have the state intervening. Our aspirational goals are above this, yes, but in the event of consecutive drought years, I think we need the flexibility as it's written in here.
Okay, now you're saying in the condition of consecutive drought years, but you're noting that this is actually in consecutive non-drought years, right? You're noting that, right?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Which again is still providing you all the flexibility and is essentially leaning in pretty heavily to say that, I mean, this is being written in a way where it's essentially saying you'd have to have some pretty unexpected and pretty difficult circumstances, because you'd have a non-drought year, which means that presumably your water levels would already be ideally better, and something would have had to have gone wrong, as it states, either operationally or emergency. So this is still leaning heavily into, it would be a kind of an unprecedented circumstance. So and that's what it's building the flexibility in for. So
Agreed. The one change that I would suggest is unbold and unitalics after we finalize this.
oh yeah. Definitely. Let's go to Eden.
Yeah, I understand what Chris was suggesting, and I understand what Mark's saying. In fact, Mark swayed me a little bit in the interim, but I was going to say, you know, to use the same super liberal that we applied to Santa Margarita, which is the leaky bathtub that drains into these, or at least primarily one of these aquifers, is maybe not accurate. This one should be maybe a little bit more conservative, and I would strike the second consecutive non-drought year portion, and I might say, I might suggest that we could say undesirable results occur if groundwater levels in any two of the Lompico, Monterey, or Butano aquifers fall below minimum thresholds.
Okay, say that again, Eden. I don't necessarily want Georgina to start typing it just yet, but go ahead and give your counter proposal.
Yeah, to be a little bit more conservative than we were with Santa Margarita, I would get rid of the bolded part that was, you know, suggested for Santa Margarita. And I would say, I would define it as undesirable results occur if groundwater levels in any two of the three fall below minimum thresholds.
In non-drought years.
Correct.
Okay. All right, so everybody just log that in your, you know, make a note to yourself if you don't mind, please. And then we'll come back to this part of discussion. And Eden, as I stated earlier, since you're offering a counter proposal, which is again fine, that's what we're supposed to be doing. Can you speak a bit to the rationale of your suggestion and how you feel that best serves the interest of the agency? And again, I'm not challenging it. I just want you to express how does that serve the interest of the agency and
Yeah, I
the
mean,
constituents and the basin.
Yeah, I just think it's slightly more conservative, where we say that we're not being as liberal as we were with Santa Margarita. We're holding those three aquifers to a higher standard, but we're only doing so if the combination is so dire that two fall below at the same time, not just any one of them.
Okay, and that's getting perhaps a bit to something that Mark had said. I'm construing from that embedded in that is you're thinking that that's upholding this idea of being aspirational, that the agency is therefore holding itself to a more conservative standard to force it to be doing the things needing to be achieving those aspirations. Am I right?
I would not go so far as to say that that nuanced adjustment is in any way aspirational. It's just a little more conservative than the absolute flexible wiggle room we built in for Santa Margarita because it's a leaky bathtub.
Got it. Okay. Let's go to Gail and then to Ruth.
Yes, Georgina, can you remind me how groundwater levels in, say, the Butano and the Lompico lag current weather? In other words, it takes a while for that water to get down there. So the question is whether it even makes sense to say anything about non-drought year. If it takes more than a year for the water to get down there, then it doesn't make sense to talk about whether it's a non-drought year. It just
Right.
would make more sense to just have the second consecutive year. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. There is the lag, and actually in the Lompico has the greatest lag. The Butano has a less of a lag because there's more surface outcrops
Exposed. Yeah.
exposed at the surface. Yeah, so it gets more recharge, direct recharge from rainfall. That's a good point that you make there, and
I
the
know
reason.
you guys
Go ahead.
calculated this. I can remember seeing diagrams, but I don't remember what the number was. Do you
No,
remember?
I don't have a number for that. I've never calculated what that lag is because it's so complicated by how much what the changes in pumping are. It's probably several years, and it's hard because, for example, in the recent drought, groundwater levels were recovering, even though there was less recharge, and that's one because it's got the lag, and then two because there was less water demand. So it's complicated by that. Yeah.
So Gail,
Well, just to complicate things, Dave, what I'm suggesting is that we keep in the second consecutive for the reasons that Mark said, that we want to have, you know, some flexibility and that it's a clear trend. It isn't just some glitch. But I would get rid of the non-drought, so that's deleted.
How do you feel, just while I've got you, how do you feel about what Eden had proposed about the
I'm not very fond of that. I think that, well, in the first place, I'm not really wild about having the Monterey in there. I mean, to call it an aquifer is overly generous. But I don't, for example, I just wouldn't want to, what we really care about here is what the Lompico is doing. And, you know, if the Lompico is going up, the Monterey and the Butano are going up as well. And so, frankly, you know, if I were writing this, I would just get rid of Monterey or Butano. Sorry, I forget Butano because in geology we call it the Butano. But anyway, so, but you know, I don't want to confuse the issue here. I don't think it's because. But anyway, I don't like the idea of just saying 2 out of 3. I just think that's a complexity that we don't need. Like I said, if I were going to revise that at all, I would just say desirable results occur if groundwater levels in the Lompico fall below minimum thresholds in the second consecutive year, period. That would be my preferred way of talking about it.
Okay. All right.
Okay, Dave, may I respond, please, to both Gail and to Eden's points there? Yes. The reason why Monterey is in because we have it as a representative monitoring point. So there's a minimum threshold to anything that's a representative monitoring point. So, you know, this should be Lompico Aquifer Monterey Formation. I don't ever call it an aquifer in the GSP, and the Butano Aquifer really is how it should be termed. But it has to be in there because it's a representative monitoring point. And you're right that if you increase groundwater levels in the Lompico, it's going to help these other formations as well. In terms of what Eden had said, I do have a problem with that because it's always related to the representative monitoring point. So the Lompico has a number of representative monitoring points. The Butano only has 2. And then the Monterey only has 1. So if you remembered, I talked before when people were looking, other basins have looked at undesirable results as being a certain percentage of representative monitoring wells falling below minimum thresholds. So the way that Eden had stated that's not, that's too general. It has to be based off the representative monitoring points.
Okay. With an establishment of over the 20 years, a more expanded monitoring network, is that in the realm of possibilities? I'm not advocating, but I mean, the intent, I presume, is that there would be an expanded network if need be, right?
Yeah, no, there will be.
Okay, so having additional RMPs is not out of the realm of possibilities.
No.
But right now we're dealing with the numerics that we have. Let's go to Ruth and then to Jack.
Okay, first off, I like the idea, Gail's idea of removing non-drought year. And my main point is I have some language to cut down the verbiage on that second part. Should I put it to the group now, or should we just clean it up later on?
No, let's go ahead, because I want people, as we're moving along here, thinking about what a finalized statement's going to be. So if you've got some suggestions, let's get it out there now for consideration.
And also, because it also carries over to the Santa Margarita. So I fully expected us to be doing this. So please go ahead, Ruth, I'm ready.
Okay, undesirable effects do not include unforeseen events such as emergencies or, and I'm adding severe operational issues.
Okay, so you're starting after the word second consecutive year. Let's, for argument's sake, assume we're striking non-drought. Then we'd be saying, then the next sentence would start with what you just said, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so it'd be undesirable results occur.
Do not occur.
Do not occur.
Oh, do not include.
Do not include.
Unforeseen events such as emergencies or severe operational issues.
Sorry about the noise.
Okay, and then basically everything else below that would be struck. Okay, and Eden, I know we're starting to do some wordsmithing, so I will come back to your suggestion. I don't want you feeling like you're being not honored.
No, we're ignoring Eden. I'm used to it.
No, facilitator is not doing that, Director. Okay. Were there any other proposed editorial changes from you, Ruth?
That's it.
Okay, let's go to Jack and then to Jeff, and then we'll keep conversation going.
Yeah, I actually like the idea of deleting that second consecutive, those words. I think it is different, and we shouldn't be getting that low in a non-drop year, so I actually like the suggestion to remove those words.
Now, you are clear that creates and I'm not taking sides, I just want you're clear that is creating a tighter boundary for you all in terms of state intervention, right?
How quickly would that state intervention occur?
That we can't speculate on that because it hasn't happened yet. That's not been tested yet.
No, it's only going to happen after 2042.
Right. Oh, you mean when would it first start happening, Jack, or how long would it take?
No. When would the state step in? Yeah, when would they do something?
Okay. So it's what Georgina just said. So after 2042 is when that intervention starts taking place. This becomes a higher bar, if you will, for that intervention 20 years from now.
Yeah, I just feel like we need to do more. It needs to be more than what we're using for the Santa Margarita, and that seems like a reasonable way to go, I believe. So I'm comfortable with that.
All right. Okay. Let me go to Jeff, and then I want to come back to Jack's suggestion about whether we're going to strike that, and I want to come back to Eden's suggestion. Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I would prefer to leave back in the second consecutive, because I think that if something occurred, maybe you unexpectedly went below that threshold, and as soon as you realized that you were over pumping in that area, you could respond and then correct it so you don't do it a second year in a row. So I think I like second consecutive, and I like getting rid of non-drought year. I think that's appropriate because it is deeper aquifers and they should be more stable, but other than pumping. And then lower down, I also thought that the operational issues or emergencies was a little bit maybe too open, like the operational issues. I mean, what if you just have you want to supply a bunch more water? Is that an operational issue? I did hear severe operational issues. I was thinking maybe emergency operational issues, just make it all one phrase. And it kind of incorporates severe in there. It's emergency operational issues.
So let me pose a question to you all, because I'll be candid as facilitator. I'm not quite sure what to do about something here, because language like this has actually gone through a prior full board discussion by you all. And I'm not really sure how you all collectively want to handle when you've arrived at something, kind of green lighted it, again, not as a formal action, but green lighted it. And if you are wanting me to honor and address as your facilitator to continue to do the wordsmithing, I'm not passing judgment. I just want to know that, do you want to continue? Because I know that time critical is issue for any particular night we have a board meeting, and time is critical in terms of how much time we have to get the GSP done. So what do you all want me doing? When do you want to keep doing stuff, doing adjustments like this? All right, I'm not hearing.
I would say, yes, I don't mind doing wordsmith adjustments. I don't think we should get into like total content adjustments. We agreed that operational issues were something we wanted flexibility with. And operational issues wouldn't be like we just want to pump more. So, it implies something broke or something, like a fire or, something changed. So I think I'm fine. Severe, that might be a better, and I have no problem with shortening things and smithing them at the next meeting, but going through content, then we'd have to go back and look at the one we just did for content.
So in that context, using Chris's interpretation of what is meant by operational issues, and going back to what Jeff just said, it would seem that there's a logic to what, Jeff said, emergency operational issues, because Chris, in essence, what you just described is operational issues tied specifically to an emergency, as opposed to there's something called an emergency and then there's some other kind of thing that's an operational issue.
Yes.
And Jeff, I'm assuming that's what you were trying to get at as well.
I agree.
Okay, anybody? So I'm going to come back to that as well. Well, let me just ask a quick question. Just now, I see that we've got Gail and Jack in the queue. Is anybody opposed to making that change of just calling it unforeseen events such as emergency operational issues? Is anybody opposed to framing it that way?
Yes, because I am, and because just if you just add it to here, this sentence doesn't make sense. Undesirable results are not emergencies or severe operational issues. Undesirable results are when the levels are too low. So this sentence does not make sense. We could, so I would not include that. Instead, I would revise what we had originally to, if the lowered levels are related to an emergency operational issues, those levels are not considered undesirable results.
Right. Okay. So ponder that. I see that Georgina is making some adjustments. I'll come back to that because obviously we're going to be doing a fair amount of some word changing here anyway. Let me go to, well, Gail, was that what you had your hand up for?
Yeah, it was. But what I'm saying is that this sentence would replace the one that starts with "you are."
Right. So you see the bottom text that Georgina's got there now. If the lowered levels are related to emergency operational issues, comma, those levels are not considered undesirable results. So that's truncating the reason why something occurred. It's tying back in the that the undesirable result is not related to the event itself, it's related to the levels. The level is what defines an undesirable result, not the occurrence of an event. So Jack, go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to withdraw my proposal about deleting the words the second consecutive. I was persuaded by was it Jeff speaking to revising the language differently because of the fact that you know, if we without planning, but if we ended up withdrawing more water, pumping more water, that would put us in an awkward position. And so I kind of like his suggestion.
Okay. Eden, let me come back to you. You've heard some feedback from your colleagues here as well as Georgina about your suggestion of the any two of three. Do you still want that to be considered as an option, or do you have any interest in rescinding that suggestion?
I was only suggesting because it was slightly more conservative. You can scrap it. I mean, I'm persuaded by Georgina's wisdom. If there aren't RMPs until there's such time that there are sufficient RMPs and Monterey and Butano can get a little bit more respect, then forget it. But I am sort of concerned about removal of consecutive or second consecutive, but removing non-drought years. That's far more conservative and limiting for us.
Okay, so you would advocate, so you're still comfortable with, as Jack just said, retaining second consecutive, but you are concerned about striking non-drought.
Well, it completely changes the meaning of it. I mean, if we're going to say the second consecutive, if we have a 3-year drought, then all of a sudden, by no doing of our own, we've gotten to undesirable results, and we've triggered management actions that could be very expensive. That's a completely different meaning from the original content. I think there's possibly too many suggested changes at play now, and strike mine, for anyone to really compare, or for most people to compare the original statement with how they're trying to nuance it in one direction or another, conservative or liberalizing.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at. That's why I was checking first with you about whether you were interested in rescinding or retaining your original suggestion. So that brings us to, and Chris, I see your hand up, but so where I think this brings us to is Georgina, if I can ask you to take the last sentence, the if lowered levels, and if you can move that up to right after the word year. So just that last sentence, if you can just take that part and put it up below the word, right after the word year. Thank you. Okay. So where I see us at by my notes is, and Doug, I'll come back to you in a minute, and Chris, I'll come to you. In the queue is Chris and then Doug. But where I see us at is I see people perhaps arriving back to the validity or the merit of in the second consecutive, although I'm going to want to confirm that one last time. So I think that what we've got in play here is principally whether or not we would tie this to any kind of year or just a non-drought year. Like I say, I think most people that I'm hearing now saying they think they could still live with the idea of a second consecutive. So I think it's really just the second consecutive and the non-drought or any kind of a year that are still principally in play. Let's go to Chris, and then let's go to Doug, and then see where that brings us.
I think it was Gail's point that made me think it's okay to strike the non-drought year because of the time it takes for the aquifer to either undo or redo its recharge. The fact that it's a drought year might not be relevant. You know what I mean? It's not that we're trying to be more conservative. It's just, you know, just because it's a drought year for 2 years, we might not even see that in the aquifer. We might see the drop in a non-drought year. that was incurred in a series of drought years. So we might get through a 40-year drought and everything seems hunky-dory, and then we get some rain, but the levels are still going down. So I think that was what swayed me away from that, not so much to be extra conservative, but it just made real sense, practical sense that, of when we'll know we've got a problem.
Right. It's
If
more of a
I got that
hydrogeologic
right.
reactivity kind of a condition. Let's go to Doug.
Thanks. And I have to admit at this point, I'm confused about how this language will interact with my understanding of the state language and what Georgina outlined at the beginning, which was that undesirable results don't necessarily come into play during a drought. So I'm confused about why we would not specify non-drought, since it's kind of moot during drought. And I did hear from Georgina that the aquifers that are pumped do respond to resting those wells relatively quickly, so that we have a tool at our disposal. Maybe I'm misunderstanding things.
Well, let me go, Georgina, if I can come back to you to make sure that you're providing that clarity that Doug and perhaps others need, and then I'll go to Mark, and then I want to see if we can get honed in on what our singular language or optional language is up for play. But first, Georgina, can you try to respond to what Doug just said?
Sorry, I was a little distracted there. I think Cameron might be able to respond to that. He's also on here, and he had a suggestion that I couldn't really read up. Cameron?
Okay. Cam, you there? Cameron? You don't appear to be muted, Cameron, but we're not hearing you. Was there something you wanted to say? There we go. You wanted to suggest? Or do you want to respond to what Doug just said?
Well, he might not respond directly to Doug, but to a general thing. Let me quickly jump in before Cameron starts. And yeah, you know, I did last month talk more about that the extended drought is not considered undesirable. Well, groundwater levels that fall in response to an extended drought are not considered undesirable by the state. And we did include it in the Santa Margarita because it responds so quickly to rainfall. In this case, where there is this lag, I think it can go either way. And the reason why I say that is that I think that once the project, an in-lieu project or any other project is that does keep groundwater in the basin, as soon as that comes in, you give yourself quite a big buffer. Now, if you've gone 5-year drought and you haven't reached it, that's fine. If now you're going into the 9th year of the drought and you go below minimum thresholds, well, I tell you, everyone's hurting, and that's not undesirable. You know, the state won't intervene because they'd be intervening right across the state. So that's not possible, you know. So, you know, I think in this case where a project is planned, some kind of project will raise groundwater levels, it is going to give you that buffer that you need. In Santa Margarita, we had no such thing, and that's why we built in some more flexibility.
Oh, okay. So
that's kind of my view.
So in that regard, if the use of the term drought is moot because of what you just said, and notwithstanding the lag time question, then is the inclusion of the qualifier non-drought moot as well? I mean, you know, does that make that kind of moot as well? Because I mean, you're only if drought is moot, then introducing a qualifier that is different than drought would seem moot as well. I mean, what are you differentiating from? Cam, were you going to come in with a comment there?
Sure. I think it is important to be reminded of what is projected in the future, and that is if you don't do anything, that there would be minimum threshold exceedances during an extended drought period, based off those baseline simulations. So that's definitely something to keep in mind, that those exceedances are occurring. And based just on the statement and not relying on what SMGWA or the best management practice says about extended droughts, striking non-droughts would make that undesirable result. So you are then relying on what the state is saying. I think it is good for your plan to be explicit and include what you understand the state to be saying about extended drought, if you are relying on it. So it's right there in your plan and not just something that you force people to reference. So that is the one thing I would suggest considering if you are going to strike the non-drought part of it. With it included, you are encompassing that issue, I think. So it is, second non-drought year means that you're not including drought years in an extended drought. But if you do exclude it, which is, your choice as a management purpose, but you still want to not include these extended droughts that could happen, I wouldn't just leave it out and rely on, oh, this is what the state says. I would try to be explicit about it.
Okay, so I'm going to come to Mark in a minute, but basically you're saying that by including non-drought, it's sort of inserting a level of intentionality by the agency. It's not leaving it to the discretion of, well, what was meant by this agency as interpreted by the state agencies. Instead, it's this agency sort of asserting itself and saying, we understood, we knew, and we very purposely included the words non-drought to carve some space for ourselves. Am I getting that right?
Right. And if it's, if you want to change it so it's more specifically a longer drought or something like that, that's your purpose and objective. But I think it is important for these local plans to be explicit about what the local intentionality is.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Let's go to Mark, and then let's go to Peretti. And I think everybody can see that Georgina's added some further referencing, sort of tightening the sideboards a little bit by including the words or extended drought. Mark, go ahead.
I agree with the deletion of that non-drought after the second consecutive year, taking that out. Given what Gail said and Chris was also opining on, the lag time in these deeper aquifers is not as closely tied as the Santa Margarita to drought conditions. So having it in there really isn't necessary. And what Georgiana just inserted does provide some flexibility. So I'm okay with that also.
Thank you. Let's go. I know, Perrette, your staff technically, and as we've got a rule, I'm trying to, as we know, maintain discussions of the board itself. With that caveat, you have a unique role as staff because you're the manager of the agency. So is there something uniquely specific that you needed to weigh on in here? Otherwise, I'm gonna continue deferring to board members.
If it's helpful for me, emergency operational issue could also cover extended drought because it does impact operations. So even as it read before emergency and severe operational issues, that word emergency covered all types of natural disasters, including drought. And but adding it here, that works too, being more explicit.
All right, thank you. Let's go to Ruth, and let's go. So here's what I want to do. Let's go to Ruth, and let's go to Jeff. As we're going through this, I'm going to go to Ruth, I'm going to go to Jeff, and then I'm going to test two things. I'm going to then test, and I'd like Ruth and Jeff, as you're going with whatever it is you're going to say, I would like for you to weigh in as to whether you've been swayed one way or another to retain second consecutive or to delete second consecutive. Because what I'm trying to get to here is, if what we're ultimately going to vote on is language that is either striking non-drought or retaining non-drought, that's one thing. If we're adding another component of striking or not striking that and striking or not striking second consecutive, that's adding a layer of complexity of how we're going to vote on this, which is fine. I just need to start getting a sense of where folks are at on whether they've been swayed on second consecutive. So let's go to Ruth and let's go to Jeff with whatever you were going to cover, but I also want to hear from you on that one.
Yeah, second consecutive is absolutely fine with me. And I would like to take both mentions out of droughts out of it, given Perette's input. I also feel like we have two different items we're doing is we're talking to the state about taking over if we hit undesirable effect, results, but also the public is going to be looking at this plan. And we say that we've got undesirable effects, undesirable results, but they don't include drought. That just sort of doesn't pass the smell test for the public. So I like the idea of getting our aquifer up and having ourselves held to keeping it in balance even during really bad droughts.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'd like to keep the second consecutive also. I understand Gail's point about the deep aquifers not responding right away to drought, but I think extended droughts would be one of those problems where eventually they would start to show it within just a few years. So I would like some coverage for that. And if the state has it built in, great. I think it'd be good for us to put it in our statement here that extended droughts would be included in the problem that we maybe couldn't overcome. For instance, San Lorenzo Valley uses a lot of surface water, and a lot of Santa Margarita is a large percentage of their water budget. And they would probably have to go heavily into the Lompico somehow to get water in like a 15-year drought if that occurred, like they kind of show in the model we're adopting.
Okay. All right, thank you. So we're recognizing that the words non-drought and or extended drought, as per what Ruth just said, may still be in play. What I want to do now is just, and I'm sorry, but I just got to get some clarity on things here. So what I need to hear from board members is there at this point in time, based upon the conversation, is there any board member that advocates the removal of second consecutive as a qualifier? Does any board member recommend removing second consecutive? If you do, I need you to go ahead and do your raise hand. I'm not passing judgment on it. I'm just trying to get a sense of what we're dealing with language wise. So anybody support removing second consecutive? Okay, not seeing any raised hands. What that then brings us to is now, Georgina, notwithstanding that you had just added the or extended droughts, leaning back into what Perrette just said, if we were to be working solely with language that disregarded that for a minute and said if the lower levels are related to emergency operational issues because a prolonged drought falls under the category of don't strike it just yet, okay? Emergency operational issues, which, I mean, by example, today, the governor, I mean, a drought is a declared state of emergency. It's literally a gubernatorial declaration. And that took place today for a few locations in the state. So Ruth, now I want to come back to you just since you advocated for it, and I'm only doing this just to try to get us a clarity of where we're going with language. If the words or extended droughts was struck, since Georgina just thrown it in there, could you live with that, or are you feeling pretty strongly about retaining it?
Wait, I'd say
Wants it the other way around.
strike it.
Oh, you did say strike it. Okay, I'm sorry. My bad. Okay, great. Okay. All right. Okay. So where I think we're at is the language you see before you with either retaining the words non-drought or striking non-drought. So it'd be, undesirable results occur if groundwater levels in Lompico, Monterey, or Butano aquifers fall below minimum thresholds in the second consecutive non-drought year, or it would be in the second consecutive of any year. I think it would be something like that.
Dave, can I just speed this up by having you ask how many people would be okay with what is there right now? So in other words, taking out non-drought and adding or extended droughts. I have a feeling that you might get a majority of people to agree
Well,
to
that's where I'm going to, Gail. But again, my responsibility is to make sure, because I do this for a living, and I know that what I need to make sure is that everybody understands the language that they're weighing in on. So I just want to make sure that we're clear, and that's exactly where I'm taking us to next. But before I do that, I have to see if there's any further commentary, because then I need to go to the public and staff, and then I'll come back to you all. So it just appears to me that that's what's in play as non-drought. So are there any of the board members that want to weigh in on this? Okay, having not seen any, let's go ahead. Are there any members of the public that would wish to speak to the discussion that you've heard your board have, or any other comments that you would like your board to consider?
Again, a friendly reminder, if you're a member of the public calling in via telephone or joining via Zoom webinar, raise hand. If you raise your hand, that's how you get in the queue to comment. If you're calling in via telephone, it should be *6.
Okay, any members of the public wish to weigh in?
Seeing none, hearing none.
Okay, so board, I'm going to bring you back. Again, this is not a formal action, but this is direction to staff. So the language before you is undesirable results occur if groundwater levels in the Lompico, Monterey, or Butano aquifers fall below minimum thresholds in the second consecutive year, second consecutive non-drought year. If the lowered levels are related to emergency operational issues or extended droughts, those levels are not considered undesirable results. What I'd like to do is I'm going to go around the horn and see, and the question is, can you live with it as it is? And Georgina, please remove the striking of non-drought for right now, please. Okay, so the language you see before you, what I want to now do is go ahead and call the question, and the question will be, do you approve it as it is, or do you want to strike the words non-drought? So the question is, I approve, or I can live with it, or strike non-drought. That's what's before you. So let me just make a note to myself, hold on. All right, so you're either keeping it as it is or you're striking non-drought. Director Angfer?
Approve.
Okay. Director Cassidy?
Keep it as it is.
Director Koopman?
I can live with it.
Okay. Director Mahood?
strike non-drought.
Okay. Director Stiles?
Strike non-drought.
Director McPherson?
Strike non-drought.
Director Dills?
I can live with it.
Okay. Director Smalley?
Strike non-drought.
Okay. Director Perry?
Strike non-drought.
Okay. And Director Koenig?
As is.
We have 5 of each.
Oh,
Director Koopman, you have your hand up?
Could I switch my vote just to make it go forward?
You can do whatever you'd like, sir. What would you like to do?
Strike it?
Strike it?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody else wish to revote? Okay, then the record will show that we had 2 members, excuse me, we had 3 members identify that they would like to keep it as is. We had 1 member that could live with it, which was Director Dills, and then the remainders indicated that they would like to strike non-drought. So by a thin majority, the language you see with the adjustment that Georgina has just made will be the language. Now, Georgina, what does this do, if anything, to us with regards to language regarding Santa Margarita? Or is that something we are not going to talk about?
No, I think it's just going to change. This bit is going to change, yeah. Of that, because and it says non-drought. We do have that in that one. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's just
We're
this.
gonna have to return to that. At another meeting.
No, I don't think we'll return. The next time people see this, it will be in the GSP when
Okay.
they review it. Yeah.
And we had non-drought in with the Santa Margarita for a specific
Yes.
reason,
Yes.
and that still stands.
Okay. All right. Are there any other questions or comments? So staff has got its direction. Georgina, is there anything else that you would like to close out with here?
No, I'm just happy it's done. Yes. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, we are now going to move on to Cameron Tana with the sustainability indicator number 4, reduction of groundwater storage. And again, as a reminder, as I stated at the outset, Cameron may be moving quickly through some of the slides in order to get to some other items and expedite discussion.
I think Nick is just getting Cameron's sharing capability up.
Is the title slide sharing?
You're up. Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Sorry for the lack of technical adeptness there, but I think we're ready to go. So what I want to do today is go back and review this indicator for reduction of groundwater and storage. Georgina introduced it back in September, I believe, so it's been a while, and does require review because it might not be what you think it is. Excuse me. And then having gained that common understanding, we do have a proposal for sustainability management criteria for this indicator for you to consider today. And so as Georgina introduced last fall, it's called change of groundwater and storage, but the metric is actually not change of groundwater and storage. If you look at the SMGWA regulations, it describes the minimum threshold as the amount of volume groundwater withdrawn without causing undesirable results. So basically, the metric is a pumping number that won't cause undesirable results. And so when we think about storage and total storage in the basin and then the effective storage that can be withdrawn from the basin, those aren't the numbers that we are trying to identify with criteria. We're trying to identify the amount of water that can be withdrawn really on a regular basis without leading to undesirable results and without dropping groundwater levels too low, as we were talking about in the last topic. So the best management practice goes on to talk about what to consider, and won't go through this in detail, but really a lot of it is related to what groundwater levels are doing and what aquifer conditions are like. So it points to not necessarily storage, but what the undesirable results for something like groundwater levels would be. So this indicator is really meant to prevent significant unreasonable conditions in the other indicators. When you think about it, pumping in itself is not an undesirable result. It's what happens when you pump too much. And how do you know you pump too much? You see undesirable results in too low groundwater levels, stream flow depletion, subsidence if that's occurring in your basin. So this is a bit of a prevention measure to prevent those other things, not an undesirable result in itself. Georgina presented an initial proposed draft that seemed to go over decently back in the fall, where it does reference avoiding long-term decline of groundwater storage, but that a significant unreasonable condition is really the volume of groundwater extracted that causes undesirable results for any other sustainability indicator. So for your basin, you need to look at the other sustainability indicators that are important for your basin, like lowering groundwater levels and surface water depletion. Are there undesirable results? And that really is what the reduction of storage criteria are based off. What pumping will avoid undesirable results for indicators like the two listed here. So the GSP regulations say that this minimum threshold be supported by the sustainable yield, but when you think about what it's actually gating at, it's getting at what Sigma defines as the sustainable yield. Sigma defines sustainability as the absence of undesirable results. And so if you have the absence of undesirable results, your pumping is within the sustainable yield, and you're managing the basin sustainably, and you're meeting the sustainable goal. So that's what this criteria is all about. It's what pumping will not result in undesirable results. In other words, what pumping is the sustainable yield. And we are proposing to be consistent with that, where the sustainable yield will be used as a minimum threshold for this indicator. Now, sustainable yield, it's important to recognize that it's an estimate of overall pumping, but whether you have undesirable results or not really depends on where you're pumping and from what aquifers you're pumping from. So if you're concentrating all your pumping in one area and in one aquifer, you're more likely to lower groundwater levels such as undesirable results in that area. While if you spread out your pumping in multiple aquifers and across the basin, you're less likely to have undesirable results with too low groundwater levels. So just points to that, but this number is generally a basin-wide number, just points to that this is an estimate of what will prevent undesirable results and really doesn't guarantee you that you'll prevent undesirable results. So all that's required is one set of criteria for the whole basin. So for a minimum threshold, it would be the sustainable yield for the whole basin set as a minimum threshold for this indicator. Based off the conceptual model of the basin, we are recommending that criteria be set by aquifer, and this is consistent with what we were just talking about with representative monitoring points in each of the aquifers that could define undesirable results. We previously suggested possibly developing criteria by sub-area because, as mentioned before, you're more likely to have effects on pumping effects on undesirable results based off of where you're pumping. We don't think this is beneficial to add this kind of discretization with this criteria because you're going to know whether you have undesirable results or not based off of your groundwater levels principally or what stream flow depletion is. So this doesn't really add that much. It's really meant to be a guide to prevent undesirable results. And if you have undesirable results and you're pumping less than this amount, you're still having undesirable results. If you're pumping more than this amount and you have undesirable results for too low groundwater levels, it means you have to adjust your estimate. So having all these numbers you potentially have to adjust based off of what you're observing is not really helpful from a management standpoint, in my view. How are we going to estimate sustainable yield? We use the tool of a groundwater flow model that projects future conditions and what under future conditions, how much pumping is going to avoid undesirable results. So that's basically the approach for estimating sustainable yield we have taken. And this shows up in a couple places. It'll show up in the basin setting part of the GSP, but then also because we're using it to help us with this SMC, it'll show up in the SMC part of the GSP. And so as again, we're trying to avoid those undesirable results, how much pumping can be supported without having undesirable results. And so we go to the model results and say, what have we done so far? You could try to be very specific and try to optimize the maximum amount of pumping and avoid undesirable results. That isn't necessary. We can look at what we've done so far and say, well, what have we learned about what sustainable yield might be? And when we look at the model results of projected conditions without projects and management actions based off of how you just defined undesirable results. And we did prepare this somewhat presumptuously, but based off of that, you have these baseline results do not show undesirable results. If you look at an example from the Santa Margarita, we have minimum threshold exceedances at times, but they're not in consecutive non-drought years. And then there's an exceedance in this extended drought that's in the simulation, but that's also not considered an undesirable result. You look at the baseline results for an example from the 1 RMP in the Monterey Formation. It's this brown line, the lowest line, without projects and management actions. It stays above the minimum threshold, so we don't have undesirable results there. And similarly, we go from aquifer to aquifer as we're trying to estimate sustainable yield for each aquifer, look at whether there are undesirable results, and look at what the pumping is associated with that. So in the Lompico, our example here, we have some minimum threshold exceedances, but they're only during the extended drought that are simulated toward the end of the simulation, and we don't consider those undesirable results. Similarly, for the Butano, again, the minimum threshold exceedances only occur during undesirable results. So this is basically our simulation results are saying the pumping that is simulated in this baseline, you're able to avoid undesirable results, and that's our best estimate right now of what sustainable yield is or might be, but recognizing that this really is a number that could very easily be justified to be revised based off of what you observe in the aquifer. And so the pumping that's associated with all these baseline simulations is based off of a slight increase over time for pumping in the Butano, Lompico, and Monterey with some variation with climate, but it's pretty constant. So we can look at the average over that long term and say that average pumping in each of those aquifers did not result in undesirable results. So that average pumping is within the sustainable yield. There was some room, so we'll add a buffer to that for estimating the sustainable yield for use as a minimum threshold, 5%. But this is our estimate based off of the modeling results. Santa Margarita, there is more variation over time with the climate because of San Lorenzo Valley water district's surface water supply that varies a lot more with climate and affects how much they pump. You can see during the extended drought that does result in increasing pumping towards the latter years of the simulation. You can see this black line for the total, but because the other aquifers don't change that much, it really represents change in Santa Margarita pumping, but it's higher in the later years. And although we don't have undesirable results because it's an extended drought, we're also not really proving that we're avoiding undesirable results in those periods at that higher pumping. So our recommendation is to estimate sustainable yield on the earlier, lower pumping from the Santa Margarita that's estimated for 2030 to 2049 that wasn't during the extended drought. And so we use these pumping estimates used in the simulations as estimates for sustainable yield and as minimum thresholds. We're also recommending, when evaluating for undesirable results, to base the evaluation on the 5-year average of pumping so that you can have some flexibility on year-to-year pumping and evaluate kind of the long-term sustainable yield. So that's the minimum threshold and undesirable results. But we also want to set measurable objectives, as Georgina has told you. That's a more aspirational goal. Where do you want to cut pumping to? Our understanding is that the idea is the agency wants to raise groundwater levels by implementing some projects and management actions, and the one that represents lower pumping as a goal is the scenario that we simulated for in-lieu pumping. So we basically take those pumping amounts that are a target to get to both for lowering pumping based off of some in-lieu supply and for raising groundwater levels as desired by the agency, and use those as a measurable objectives for pumping. And this is also something where the change of groundwater and storage would be reduced compared to what the minimum threshold is. But if you look at the last slide, I did not mention this. The last slide, you're able to, in the non-extended drought area, at this amount of pumping, the change of groundwater and storage is fairly stable. So combining those parts of the proposal into a full proposal for groundwater and storage SMC, we do have, look at the numbers that we've simulated that have been shown to avoid undesirable results, the set as the minimum threshold based off of a sustainable yield estimate, evaluate undesirable results for this indicator based off of a 5-year average, and then set a measurable objective based off of in-lieu project pumping. Should note, though, that we've referred to undesirable results for this indicator, but really this is an indicator to avoid undesirable results in other indicators. So that the observations of whether or not you're having undesirable results for groundwater levels or stream soil depletion really will drive how you evaluate this indicator in the end. If you're seeing something that's inconsistent with these estimates, you would want to revise your criteria for this indicator. So this is really set as a guide to try to say, well, this is how we're going to avoid undesirable results going forward, but it would be easily adjusted based off of what you actually observe as you manage the basin. So that is the proposal, and thank you for your participation.
Okay, so let's go back to that the previous slide. So what is on this slide is the proposal, right?
Right.
Okay. All right, as we have done several times before, let's go ahead and open up the floor first for general questions or comments from board members about what Cameron has presented. And once we've made sure that there's clarity on any of the items, then I'll bring us to this proposal. Doug, go ahead, please.
Thanks, and thanks for that, Cameron. I understand this is almost sort of a set of circular arguments as this indicator relates to the other indicators, but I guess what I want to do is just kind of get crystal clear on how these numbers would interact with or be affected by any of the PMAs we're undertaking that would have as their specific goal to raise groundwater levels in order to create storage that's available to us during a drought, whether that's in lieu or injection or whatever. The idea is that, we may relax our pumping when we can, but we may have it be more intense during other times. And I could easily foresee that we would exceed these numbers without necessarily triggering any of the other indicators, if the projects are working as designed. So I just want to be crystal clear that would not necessarily qualify as an exceedance here.
Yeah, what we are proposing are looking at kind of 5-year increments for the averages. So you do look at medium term that would allow for increases in pumping over a few years if your storage, if you had the storage to support it. It might be worth looking at a longer time frame based off of what you're describing to say, well, you were able to reduce pumping over this amount of time, so we're able to increase pumping for a certain amount of time after that. But in the end, it shouldn't be considered an undesirable result that triggers state intervention if you exceed these numbers, but you don't have undesirable results for any other indicators. So for what you're describing, and to be consistent with what I said before in the last section, it's probably a good idea to be explicit about this, is that this is how we are viewing this indicator. We're going to base these estimates and adjust as necessary based off of whether undesirable results for principally groundwater levels are occurring or not. So if you are able to, for example, raise groundwater levels with your projects, you could say, well, now our minimum threshold for the next 5 years is higher because we've met our measurable objective for a certain number of years that have increased the storage. We're going back and saying our minimum threshold now is this. And so to me, this is the one that it's really easy to justify changing over time.
Okay, that's super helpful. And I'll just note for the record that I'm always a fan of making the implicit explicit.
All right, let's go to Jeff, please.
Yeah, I'm finding this pretty confusing. So this is circular, like Doug said. I mean, really, the levels and the storage that we've got with the other indicators are going to help our aquifer out and achieve our goals. But we also are required to put this one in because this one seems like it really limits us in certain ways. For instance, the in lieu project pumping, I think that requires a lot of surface water, but there's a lot of years where there isn't surface water because the rain doesn't fall conveniently for that. So, and I think we're already we may be at the minimum threshold already when you add the Santa Margarita users up together currently. And that's not even including the emergency pumping that's going on right now with the fact that San Lorenzo Valley can't use a lot of their surface water right now. So this looks really like we could really trigger this really easily and run into problems with it. And I think just going through this really quickly because it's complicated and going past it would be a bad idea. I would rather not do this at all, frankly.
Yeah, I think that has a lot of merit, that it's more confusing than helpful, especially as a sustainable management criteria when it's the definition of this undesirable results is that you have other undesirable results. So, I think that's a good point, but it is required. It is one of the criteria that you do have to establish, and it is basically saying say your minimum threshold at what you think is the sustainable yield, and then you really have I think a lot of justification to adjust this number based off of what you're actually observing in the aquifer. So it is a starting point. As far as the values, and certainly a good hard look at them is important because you probably don't want to start off with saying, okay, we've started off with minimum threshold exceedances in our first annual report after this GSP for this indicator. They do represent higher numbers than what has been pumped recently, and you will look at it over multiple years is what we're suggesting. So, 1 year of emergency pumping should not result in exceedance.
So Cam, I want to just double back to something that in the exchange between you and Jeff, and notwithstanding Jeff's sort of understandable frustration and your empathizing with that. I think what I heard you say is, notwithstanding either of y'all's opinions, it's really the dispensing with this is not feasible, right? I mean, the state requires, unless there is a kind of categorically defensible way in which a particular basin can say we are not addressing the sustainability indicator because it's not a factor. So for instance, inland basins are doing such a statement regarding seawater intrusion, for example, but even that, then they're still having to make a formative declarative statement in their GSPs that they are dispensing with saltwater intrusion because it's not applicable. You have to sort of make a negative declaration. Am I understanding correctly? You're saying the same thing here?
Right, and I think a declaration like that in this case would be very difficult because I think you would have to say that pumping cannot result in undesirable results, and that's really what Sigma is primarily about, is pumping resulting in undesirable results. So it is a requirement. I don't think it's possible to get out of this requirement. Did forget to address one part of Jeff's comment with respect to the in lieu project pumping. So that is just setting a measurable objective, which is not a enforceable number. If you don't meet that, you're not going to cause state intervention. The part that you want to stay below is the minimum threshold representing sustainable yield. And even then, if you exceed it, but you don't have undesirable results in other indicators, I think you go back and say, well, we made these estimates based off best available information in 2021. Now we're pumping more than these numbers. We're not having undesirable results. Our information as of 2027 is that these numbers were too low. We can raise these numbers. And so that to me, that's a really easy justification going forward. And it's not like, to me, it's not like the other ones where you're saying, we really don't want groundwater levels to drop below this point because that will cause a lot of problems. This is really our best estimate of those estimates, not those groundwater levels not dropping too low. And we can, we'll be justified to revise them if we can maintain groundwater levels above those points at higher pumping numbers.
Okay. All right, thank you. So Jeff, I know that that's not desirable, no pun intended to that term, but I hope that's putting some clarity on it, that it's kind of not an option, or at least,
Well, we have to do something in this area, but what flexibility do we have is a question. So the bottom two lines I get now are tied together. The measurable objective is based on the in lieu project pumping. That's cool. Okay, and that's only an aspirational goal, which of course we're shooting for something along those lines if at all possible. And then the top three lines are kind of grouped together, where those top ones are based on the sustainable yield equals baseline pumping plus 5%, and the 5-year average pumping above any minimum threshold has to average above that for 5 years, then it's undesirable, is what you're saying there. So it gives us a little bit of operational wiggle room for 5 years, over a 5-year period. And so that's helpful. Do you know where we stand currently on our consumption relative to these numbers? That would be very helpful to have that in this chart, to see what our current consumption is. And also to note that these are based on the climate model that's rather conservative, saying that there's going to be bad climate coming, more than the nominal that's predicted. So, and then these thresholds are set by there. So if these thresholds are a lot tighter than what we're currently doing, that would be important to know. Or because I think we're kind of close on some of these numbers currently, or maybe even over right now with some of these numbers. On like the
my understanding is that they are slightly higher than what you've been pumping recently, but you're right that they are close, because what they're based off of is a small increase in pumping over time with relatively small assumptions of relatively small population growth, but it does not increase much over that. So that is what it represents right now. You're also right it'll be very important to say what it's based off of, and it's based off of specific modeling and model assumptions, and that it really does just represent an estimate, but also that there hasn't been an effort to optimize it, to say, well, what is the maximum amount of pumping where we can somehow avoid undesirable results everywhere, which is possible, but is somewhat challenging to do, and unnecessary, given that the way this indicator is set up is you will adjust it based off of best available information going forward anyway.
So to Jeff's suggestion then, I mean, some of the things you're just saying, as I'm understanding, is you're trying to assuage Jeff's concerns that in the narrative of the GSP, you'd be including some of this language anyway. The comparative that Jeff just asked for about current conditions, are you saying that well, I got two questions, one for you, Cam, and one for you, Jeff. For Cameron, for you, are you saying the comparative would be feasible and could be included in the GSP?
Oh, yeah, I think that's an excellent idea.
Okay, all right. And so Jeff, for you, because again, we're gonna try to get a recommendation from the board tonight, as we've done several times. Can you, knowing that Cameron is affirming that they think that's a good idea, and some of these other items that he talked about would inherently be included in the narrative, could you be okay with weighing in, voting on this, so to speak, tonight, even if it didn't have that comparative data tonight?
I think the comparative data would be critical for people to consider this correctly, because if I've heard, I got quoted a number, I believe that was something like 660 for Santa Margarita by San Lorenzo Valley currently, or recently anyways. And I think in one of the reports that you guys sent us, one of the ones that's coming up here later, or maybe it's the one that we're supposed to be reviewing by the first week of May, I think it was suggesting that independent well owners are using close to 300, better high 200s in acre feet, which I'm not sure if that's de minimis users. I think that's glommed together with larger users that are going to be metered soon. So we'll have some idea of what they're really doing. But I mean, the estimate there would put us right in violation right off the bat. So from what I'm currently understanding. So that's why I think it'd be important for everyone to see that's what we're talking about here, that we'd immediately go into violation from year one, and we got 5 years going forward here.
Okay, so the suggestion would be, and again, I'm just because my goal obviously is try to get you all a consensus, and if that's a showstopper for you, again, we obviously can't provide the comparative data now, but if it's a caveat that once presented in the GSP comparative data about current pumping conditions, then we would include that sort of as an asterisk to the vote coming up later. So you're looking for at a snapshot in time when the GSP is developed, and Georgina, I'll come to you in a second. What you're looking for is the snapshot in time of what the current pumping is, right?
Yeah, as best we can. I mean, some of it we don't know because like a lot of the independent well owners don't have meters, as we are aware of. So we have an estimate for them. But some of the independent well owners are I think they're glommed together with some of the large commercial users. There's some independent well owners there that are not part of a large system that are metered because they're over 2 acre feet per year. They're not de minimis. So we can put meters on them. So if we could break this into 3 categories of consumption, our estimate for de minimis, our estimate for independent well owner non-de minimis, and then the Santa Margarita that that the water companies are pumping, which is mostly San Lorenzo Valley, that I'm aware of.
Okay, Georgina, go ahead.
Yeah, Director Koopman, I just wanted to let you know that 300 that you're talking about for the de minimis users is for all aquifers, including Monterey, which there are quite a lot of users in there. So when we do put in the different lines that represent the different users, you'll see that we're not over the 850 in Santa Margarita that you see. It's still below that.
Okay, so some of that's allocated to the Monterey. That makes sense.
Yes.
Okay, so
yes.
But seeing that would still be helpful, I think, for everyone.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Broken into those 3 categories, preferably.
Okay. So let me continue the open floor here for questions or comments from folks before I move into getting any suggestions or proposed modifications to the proposal here. So any questions or comments still from any other board members? Okay, seeing none and hearing none. Any staff wish to weigh in at this time with any comments? Okay, coming back to the board then, notwithstanding some of the items that Jeff had just spoken of about, and then Cam had affirmed, Cam and Georgina had affirmed about ways to present some of this information ultimately in the GSP. Again, staff needs direction. So you have the proposal before you. Are there any proposed modifications that any board members would like to make at this time on this proposal? Okay, hearing none and seeing none, then what I'd like to do is go ahead and let's open up the floor for the public. Any public comment on this topic, then we'll see where that plays out, and then I will come back to this and we'll go for a approve or disapprove vote on the proposal as it stands. Again, with the caveats of the conversation that just took place about how certain other information would ultimately be presented in the GSP. Nick, let's go ahead and open up to the public, please.
All right, members of the public, if you have anything to say about this item, go ahead and raise your hand. Again, if you're calling in via telephone, it's going to be *6. That's *6. Seeing none.
Okay. All right. So what I'd like to do now is we have before us the proposal. Obviously, there's been discussion on this, and so with the caveat, Cam, did you want to say something else, or were you just turning your video back on?
No, I don't have anything else.
All right. Okay. So with the discussion as is, and with the caveats that, again, this is just to continue the ball rolling for the technical team and does not reflect verbatim exactly how this would be presented. And you've heard the discussion about other additional information that would be included once it gets into the GSP. What I'd like to do is call the question, and it's going to be a yes or no question. Having already checked to see if there was any proposals or modifications, and having not heard any, I'm going to call this as a yes or no, support, or an aye, or however you want to do it, or no, I don't support it. If you don't support it, and you've got a counter proposal, that would be great to hear. Again, your options are support, can live with it, or you don't support it. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and start. Director Cassidy.
Support.
Okay. Director Dills.
Support.
Director Perry.
Support.
Director Mahood.
Support.
Director Koopman.
I'd like to wait and not support it currently until we see the final data.
Okay. Director Koenig.
Support.
Director Angfer.
Sorry,
Director
support.
Angfer. Support. Okay, thank you. Director Smalley. Director Smalley.
Support.
Thank you. Director Stiles.
Support.
And Director McPherson.
Support.
Thank you. We have 9 support and 1 rejection. So at this point in time, this recommendation sustains, and this will be the direction that technical staff will work with the caveat that Director Koopman has raised, and I think that can be accommodated as the GSP is starting to get written in narrative terms. All right, we are at 7:45. We have a fairly lengthy next presentation, which is on the PMAs. I'm going to recommend, is anybody opposed to taking at least a 5-minute break, if not a 10-minute break? Anybody opposed to that? 10-minute? Okay, let's go ahead and do a 10-minute break just to give everybody a chance to stand and stretch. We've been at this for over 2 hours at this point straight. So we will do a 10-minute and we will reconvene at 7:55, please. Okay, let's, it is 7:55, so, oh, wait, okay. Well, you've got 7:52.
Yeah, nice try, Dave.
Well, I was going by 7:45 on my clock, so 10 minutes is now, but we'll go by your clock.
I also have 7:52, so.
Okay, that's cool. I'm just like a slice it.
Time zone. What time zone are you in, Dave?
I've had this the last couple of days. I don't really understand how my computer is not synced. I mean, I thought we were all on just like universal, like all the electronic devices are time coded identically. And for some reason, my phone and my computer are not linked to each other. And apparently my computer ain't linked to what you guys are. So
It's a minor time travel thing. I've seen this movie before. So your computer was in a wormhole for just a couple of minutes and it's back, but it's been changed.
thank you for clarifying that, Chris. I don't really know what I would do without you.
To the computer, did it feel like it was in the wormhole for 3 decades?
Yeah.
And then it comes back and it's only been 3 minutes?
You've seen that movie.
You guys are the geekiest bunch of, I mean,
I doubt that, Dave.
That's probably true.
This is actually our second consecutive repeat duplicate meeting. So
no, that's probably true. Well, I will not editorialize further.
Eden, on that point, there's a quote from me in the newspaper not too long ago. I can't remember which one, but during the interview, I said something about how this was the second consecutive dry year in a row, and then I was like, "Oh wait, don't put that. That's duplicative." And then they totally printed me saying second consecutive dry year in a row.
Well, it could have been.
You will be so disappointed.
It could have been the first consecutive dry year in a row.
It could have been the third or fourth consecutive year.
Chris can probably attest, as can I, having been a former musician myself and periodically being interviewed for things other than professional, well, this kind of professional stuff, that you should get into the habit of saying or not saying certain things, because how they sound when you say them and how they look in print, boy, there's a big difference.
And how they're heard by the reporter.
Okay.
Wait. After telling us that you've got to at least tell us one story.
Who, me or Chris?
Yeah, you.
About me being a musician?
About you being misquoted and embarrassed.
No, we'll save that for another time. It's 7:55. Okay, the big hand is on the 55 and the little hand is on the 7, and so we proceed.
I remember a really good one from Scotts Valley City Council. The mayor went up after on a housing project at the beginning of Lockhart, and after about 3 or 4 hours of discussion, he was totally for the housing project, low-income housing project, but he was quoted as saying, "What, you Scotts Valleyans don't want this here because there might be other races involved or something that might come here?" And that got quoted in the Sentinel as Scotts Valley mayor says they do not want this low-income housing because it will add minorities to the community. I mean, that's literally how it was put in the newspaper as a headline. So
yeah,
that's not how he intended it. He was trying to be sarcastic, but
well, that's an example. Sarcasm and irony don't play well. You know, remember, some of you know that I did that whole rent control task force assessment for the city of Santa Cruz, and I don't remember what the quote was, but it was like a closing quote that I made to the city council, and it didn't get me in trouble or anything like that, but it was like the Santa Cruz paper just kept quoting it, like, oh, there's all these comments made by members of the public, and there's something like you're going to be at war with each other for something. I was like, oh, really? This is okay. Let's move ahead. So Sierra, so we are now moving on to projects and management actions, the long-awaited discussion about project and management actions. This is going to be a fairly sizable discussion and a fairly sizable presentation between what Sarah's going to cover and then the colleagues from WSC are going to cover. So with that, Sarah, take it away.
All right. So I actually have just the introduction to this. I'm just going to try to set the stage, and I hope everybody enters this presentation with a sense of expectation management, because you're going to see, if you didn't already have a chance to go through the slides, that there's a lot of there's some information, but it's not everything. And that's kind of what I'm here to talk about a little bit before we really dive in. So why are we doing this? What is the purpose of the projects and management actions in the GSP, and where they fit in the GSP is in section 4. So with going to try not to actually read the slides. The GSP regulations require that we show a pathway to reaching sustainability. That's kind of the crux of what we're trying to do here. DWR knows that the 3 years or so that we've had to work on this is not going to be enough time to come out with fully well-shaped projects. And keep in mind, some of the critically overdraft basins had even less time. It's just not efficient to do all the necessary studies to finalize an approach. So our strategy that we're kind of going with here is to include everything that we think might have legs into the plan. We think this creates a lot of options for us, a lot of flexibility that can play out over time. And it gives us the opportunity to direct future grant funds and other research in the direction that makes the most sense without trying to rush big decisions, big multi-tens of $million decisions too quickly. So one thing to keep in mind is that project cost is not a factor that DWR wants you to be considering when deciding on projects and management actions. However, we all know, and we've acknowledged, and we have made it one of our guiding principles, that fiscal prudency is really a priority for our basin. And so that's another reason why we think further review of a broad range of projects, as we're proposing here, makes the most sense, rather than trying to whittle it down right now and then finding out later that maybe we were off on our numbers or off on our understanding of how much water we were going to get because we acted prematurely. So also one thing to keep in mind is that the goal of the GSP is to set and meet our sustainability management criteria, but there are bigger issues at play when you look regionally and just even within the basin at water supplies. We really want to keep in mind that some of these projects, they're not just for the SMs meeting the basin criteria, they're also to provide water supply resiliency to the water agencies, to private well owners, as well as providing flexibility for uncertainties that we can, we selected a climate change scenario, but we also know that it's wrong. And so we need to be able to have the flexibility as we move forward to make the right decisions. And so by putting projects in the GSP right now, we're not committing to doing them. We are committing to getting to sustainability. We are demonstrating that we know that we can get to sustainability. In fact, we have multiple pathways that could potentially get us there. We know that the projects are going to change over time. And we just think that this approach is really the most pragmatic for us. One thing to know is section 4 is about the projects and management actions. Section 5 is our implementation strategy. And that's where we talk about how we are going to actually implement the GSP. And the way we're laying out section 5 right now is to say, we're going to implement the GSP by spending the next 5 years really researching these projects and management actions. So we're not committing to doing anything yet. We're committing to doing what we need to do to make informed decisions a little bit further down the road. So this project flow chart, this is a small part of something that was included in the packet in September. And it's just meant to demonstrate that we're just at the beginning here. Like, getting the GSP done is sort of the first step in our project evaluation process. We had kind of a big, huge list of projects that were submitted that you saw in September. We've refined that list based on the modeling that Georgina's presented a number of times, and other feasibility considerations. And now we're getting ready to finalize these parameters for the GSP. So that's where we are now. That's a 1 to 2 year process. The next step is really to kind of narrow down this list of projects by doing an individual, like by doing feasibility studies, like looking into all of the projects that we're really thinking are most likely candidates for moving and studying them from technical perspective, from the cost benefit perspective, from the legal perspective, and also from the political perspective. Does this benefit all the necessary participants? Does everybody who's a part of this process see the benefit? Is it something that's going to garner the kind of support from all of the partners that are necessary to move forward? So that's something that's huge. You don't want to put a bunch of work into pilot testing a project that's not going to be favorable to the community or to one of the agencies. So that's kind of the next step. And then moving on from there, once we've really narrowed down our list of projects even further than we have already, once we know that the projects we want to investigate are feasible, then we really start the actual investigation of these projects. That's when we can do pilot testing, when we can develop our designs, where we have a much better sense of how much water are we going to get, how much is it going to cost, how reliable is it going to be in the face of climate change, and how are we going to pay for that? And that's when the sequel level is where you really start to get the answers to the big questions. So from where we are now, it's probably another 5 to 10 years before we see any of these projects get constructed. The projects are grouped as a way of organizing them. It's kind of a way to look at where we think the direction we're going to go is likely to be, although it's also not cementing anything. We understand that the projects that are listed at the 5-year update and the way they are grouped is likely going to be very different than what we see now, but this is for where we are. We think this is the best way forward. So the group 1 projects, all of which are listed in the packet, are basically the baseline projects. Those are ongoing water use efficiency projects. That's the conjunctive use that the San Lorenzo Valley Water District's already doing. It's LID projects that City of Scotts Valley Water District has already implemented. The group 2 projects are the ones that we've talked about the most with Georgina presenting to you, and then also conversations that the water agencies have been having at their meetings and information that they've brought in to these meetings. We broke them down by size, which is a little hard to do because we don't have concrete numbers about how much water we're going to get, but sort of an approximation of how far they get us towards sustainability. So the tier 1 projects are smaller. They may or may not get us to sustainability. They're almost certainly not going to solve all of the regional problems, but they're definitely steps in the right direction. Tier 2 projects are bigger. They're likely going to benefit the basin, might get us to sustainability, but might not help provide drought supplies. So remember, the sustainability management criteria during extended droughts, you might not need to meet your minimum thresholds, but you still actually need to provide water to people if you're a water agency. So there's bigger questions there, and that's really where the tier 3 projects come in. These are much bigger projects, much more expensive, but also benefit a lot more people, which spreads the cost over a larger base. And those are the projects where, it's during extended droughts, which we are likely to see. These are the solutions that will really make sure that the region isn't in a really bad situation, not just our sustainability management criteria, but making sure everyone has a safe and sustainable water supply. Group 3 projects that are on the list are also projects that could have legs and we could investigate later down the road. We just didn't have the time yet to put into that analysis. So that's why they're on the list. So projects there include things like various types of stormwater recharge projects that we know is something that we want to investigate. And we have maybe a sense of some locations that could be good, but we really haven't done a lot of the legwork to be able to even provide the information necessary for Section 4. And other things that are on that as well are things like direct potable reuse. It's not even a possibility now, but we put it on the list because maybe it will be a possibility in 10 years, and wouldn't it be great if we had it in our plan so that we could actually investigate whether that was something we'd be interested in here. So the last thing I'm going to bring up is we know that it's really late already, and this is a big conversation, and there's a lot of information that you're going to be presented. And you might not be completely satisfied with everything that we present. So if we wanted to put it out there that staff have considered that we could host a special workshop for the board and for the public on PMAs. And this would be an opportunity to talk about things further if there is interest. However, we don't want to commit to doing something like that. It's hard to schedule the meetings. Everybody's really busy. Unless we have guidance from the board that there's actually things that you want us to explore further at that workshop. So we're putting it out there at the table now, and I'm telling you at the beginning of the presentation, because during the presentation, I want you to be thinking about that. And I think Dave's going to come around at the end and ask, you see a need for a workshop, what would that entail? And then, you know, asking staff, would we be able to provide more information at a workshop than we did in this presentation? So that's on the table there. And then with that, I believe Perrette wanted to say a few words before we hand it over to Kirsten, who is our consultant with Water Systems Consulting, Inc., who's been doing the analysis that's going to be presented today.
Yeah, Perrette, go. I see you got a comment, so go ahead, please.
So I'm wearing the hat at the moment as the gatekeeper of this agency's contracts and invoices. And just one thing that I want the board to keep in mind when you're deciding if you need an additional or would like to have additional meeting workshop is when this scope of work with Montgomery and their subconsultants was decided, that was about 2 years ago, early 2019, and the scope was really based on the Sigma requirements. So there is not really anything in there for further exploring or explaining any of the PMAs beyond what we have brought to you. And I completely agree if that's a topic that interests you. One thing is time we have to consider, but then also it could result in a change order that is required if we bring the consultants into the fold of preparing for that workshop and presenting at that workshop. But that is by no means to say that we shouldn't have it. Just want to keep you to keep that in mind too. That's all from me.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce another member of the consultant team that you have not all collectively. I know that some of you have worked with Water Systems Consulting and specifically Kirsten in the past, but I am going to go ahead and now formally introduce Kirsten Plonka from Water Systems Consulting. And Kirsten, go ahead, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'd also like to introduce my coworker, Michael Graymarak. I'll be doing a majority of the presenting today. However, when we get to the questions, which I'd like to hold till the end for the sake of time, he'll be available to help answer questions as he was involved in developing some of these cost analysis. So today I'll be presenting the projects proposed to be included in the GSP as part of Group 2, as well as some preliminary costs and benefits to the basin. There we go. Today I'd like to cover the proposed Group 2 projects for the GSP. I'd like to review some of the key benefits and considerations for each project. I'd like to present preliminary planning level costs, and we'll get more into that in a minute. And then we'll discuss next steps and input for the projects into the GSP. Last, I'd like to reiterate, similar to what Sierra said, that including these projects in the GSP at this time is the first step in the project development and by far not the last. There's much more work to be done on these. Please keep in mind that many of the projects I'm going to be presenting on today have a long ways to go to be developed. So details and costs may change as the projects move further along. Including these projects in the GSP just gives you more tools to benefit the basin, but is not by any means an obligation to complete any of these projects. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the methodology we used before we jump into individual projects, because I think that that's where a lot of interest lies and you want to know how we looked at these. And a lot of these projects were not an apples to apples comparison when we first started. So we did the best we could to come up with a method that would give you some sense of equal comparison for projects. So to start off, where project details have been significantly developed, cost estimates were provided by member agencies. So for those, we basically escalated the cost to include factors such as inflation or elongated timelines. Okay. Projects that are still in the conceptual stage, meaning that they do not have a completed feasibility study, we use cost based on similar projects in California. So that being said, some of these projects only have like a 2-sentence description. So costs that we are providing today are very high level. These types of projects could cost less than half of our estimate or up to double our estimate. This is what's known as an estimate class 5 by the American Association of Cost Estimators and is appropriate for projects prior to pre-design. So we have also included high contingencies for all of these projects due to unknown timelines and further refinements of the projects. So yes, all of these projects should be further refined and new cost estimates should be developed, but the time to do that is when you move into SMGWA and also the pre-design stage and then again at the design stage. So the analysis shown today is meant to provide an order of magnitude comparison. Project details and costs will change as the projects are further defined. And then I'd like to again remind you that including any of these projects in the GSP gives you options, but doesn't obligate any of the member agencies to complete the project. So it just sets you up to examine the projects further, which then would lead to more refined costs. Okay, so I'd like to talk about a little bit about, these are the projects we would like to present on today. So as Sierra stated, Group 2 projects are projects currently under investigation to reach basin sustainability. We've then subdivided those projects into 3 tiers. So again, Tier 1 projects are smaller projects that head in the right direction. Tier 2 projects are likely to benefit the whole basin. And Tier 3 projects provide regional water supply security. So, and then we'll present some costs, but keep in mind, we'll group the cost at the end of each tier so that you can see a comparison in a table. Okay, so let's start with the Tier 1 projects. Okay, so for the first project, this is the San Lorenzo Valley and Scotts Valley Additional Water Use Efficiency. And this project is actually based on programs basically that are already in existence. So it includes things like increased conservation efforts, education and outreach, rebate programs and water waste policies, as well as switching out meters and addressing water loss. So again, Tier 1 projects will help, but they will not achieve sustainability on their own. So the estimated project cost based on past expenses by the member agencies is expected to be about $5.2 million in capital expenditures and $0.9 million annually for O&M. So for each project, we've developed this kind of scale. And if you look at the entire scale, it would include all the projects. But we wanted to give you some visual on the relative benefit to cost analysis and how much does the cost look versus the benefit that the project provides. Again, with these cost estimates being an order of magnitude, this is a very relative scale and it's just in comparison to the other projects. So the second project we have is projects 2 and 3 are variations of each other. They are the San Lorenzo Valley existing infrastructure in lieu conjunctive use. So sorry, this one is the existing infrastructure. They're both in lieu conjunctive use projects. So conjunctive use means it includes both surface water and groundwater. And then option 1 for this project does not include Loch Lomond water. So option 2 will, and we'll discuss that one in a moment. This smaller project utilizes existing infrastructure and benefits are localized to the San Lorenzo Valley Water District area by providing surface water to offset winter demands, which allows them to reduce groundwater pumping for part of the year. The project cost is expected to be $3.3 million in CapEx and $0.2 million. Here's the scale to look at cost versus benefit. We have these reversed, so I'm sorry, I'm saying this the opposite way. So we've got benefits on the top and costs on the bottom. Okay, so project number 3 is the second version of this project, this conjunctive use project. And this one is for San Lorenzo Valley and Scotts Valley. And so This one does include Loch Lomond water. So it provides surface water to offset winter demands for San Lorenzo Valley and Scotts Valley, which then allows them to reduce groundwater pumping for part of the year. The smaller project utilizes existing infrastructure, and the benefits are localized to both of those areas. Total project cost for this one would be $7.5 million in CapEx and $0.3 million annual. Benefits versus costs. And the last project in this tier is the San Lorenzo Valley Olympia groundwater replenishment project. So this is, again, is a conjunctive use, and it's also an aquifer storage and recovery project in the Olympia well field, which supplies available surface water to the aquifer in winter to offset groundwater withdrawals in summer. It also increases base flows to the creek. So the project cost for this is expected to be $24.8 million in CapEx and $2 million annually in O&M. Here's our slide for comparison on benefits and costs. And here's a summary table of these 4 projects so that you can see what was included in our cost analysis. We basically wanted to create everything in consistently. So when we look at some of the costs provided were just construction costs, and we recognize that there are other factors that go into actually producing and completing a project. So we've looked at including a pretty hefty contingency of 25%. Our across the board number was 15% for design. And then we included 50% indirect costs, construction costs for 50% for indirect construction costs. And that's because all of these projects were under the 50 million construction cost. Above 50 million, which you'll see at the end for more expensive projects, we knocked that down to 25 to be a little more in line with what we're seeing in construction these days. Okay. So let's move on to the group tier 2 projects. And these projects are likely to benefit the basin as a whole. The first one I'd like to talk about is the North Scotts Valley Indirect Potable Reuse. And this is 710 acre feet per year. There are a few of these projects that are similar. You'll see them later on. And the key is how much water is actually supplied. So this is an indirect potable reuse project, or IPR, as we like to call it, which would supply treated water from Pure Water SoCal for injection and to recharge into the Lompico aquifer. This would increase storage and groundwater levels in the aquifer and the basin. The project cost is estimated to be approximately $9.8 million in CapEx and $2.1 million annually in O&M. As you can see, the benefits versus cost. And the next project I'd like to talk about is the City of Santa Cruz Storage Transfer. This project provides treated surface water from the San Lorenzo River and other North Coast sources to offset some of the wet season demands for Scotts Valley and part of the San Lorenzo Valley systems. This allows them to reduce groundwater pumping. This project cost is estimated to be approximately $31 million in CapEx and $2.5 million annually for O&M. Again, you've got your benefits versus cost. Now, these two are the only two in the tier 2. Well, that was a tongue twister. And so you can see all the costs side by side. Again, the same numbers we're using consistently for contingency, design, and then due to the price, the costs, there's a larger indirect construction cost for project 6 versus project 5. Okay, and last, tier 3. So our first project here, and tier 3 projects, just to remind you, provide regional water supply security. So they actually provide water to be used in case of. The first project I'd like to talk about is the Regional Indirect Potable Reuse project at 1,500 acre feet per year. This project is a larger indirect potable reuse project, which would supply treated water from Pure Water SoCal for injection to recharge into the Lompico aquifer. Due to the increased water supply versus the earlier Project 5 for Scotts Valley, this project would not only increase groundwater levels in the basin, it would provide a supplemental water supply source during a drought. Regional participation in IPR projects would help to make these projects more attractive. It would bring higher water availability and shared infrastructure to the project. The project cost is estimated at approximately 106, or I have my number wrong, I'm sorry, 107 million in CapEx and 2.6 billion annually in O&M. Okay, the cost and benefits of these are about the same. Next, we have a larger regional indirect potable reuse project. So this is the largest indirect potable reuse project, which would supply treated water from Pure Water SoCal, as well as from a new advanced water purification facility in Scotts Valley in conjunction with wastewater from the city of Santa Cruz. For injection, so this would be to inject recharge into Lompico aquifer again, and due to the increased water supply, again, versus the other two projects, this project would not only increase groundwater levels in the basin, it would provide a supplemental water source during a drought. The project cost for this is almost 300 million, and O&M is approximately 6 million a year. Okay. Last, we have an aquifer storage and recovery project using Santa Cruz's treated drinking water. So this would use surface water from the city of Santa Cruz's treated water to inject into the Lompico aquifer to provide drought supply to the city, as well as help basin restoration. The project cost for this is expected to be 51.6 million in CapEx and 2.5 million in annual O&M. Again, you've got benefits versus cost. And now we're on our final cost summary, so you can see a comparison. I'd like to remind you that most of these costs, again, are very high level. So some of them are developed, they're based on a variety of different sources. We try to get them as accurate as we could, given the project description level. And they should be further refined. Our recommendation is absolutely to move forward with including them and refining those as part of the CEQA process and pre-design. So this is just the first step into moving these projects along, including them as options and tools that will help you with achieve basin sustainability. And it also will keep these projects moving so that you can move into the feasibility study stage for some of these higher level projects. And last, I'd like to open it up for questions.
All right. So to try to maintain some level of cohesiveness here, I'd like to, if we could, go ahead and scroll back all the way up to the top of the chart, so to speak, the presentation, and get to the initial projects, and then kind of go through that sequentially and see if we've got any questions along the way. I want to again remind everybody of even before you go to there, Kirsten, if you can go to the assumptions or the
methodology. Yeah,
methodology. So I just want to remind everybody, just to reiterate again, the methodologies, because one of the things you've heard Sierra say and you've heard Kirsten reiterate a couple times is as best as I understand it, the team knows what they know, right? They've laid everything out that they feel comfortable presenting and knowing. So that's a caveat. So with that, let's go on to the first project. And what I want to do is kind of go through this a little bit sequentially so that we're not having to hop around too much. So can you go to there we go. So does anybody have, so Jeff and Ruth, I see your hands up. Let me just pause. Do you have questions about this project? No. Okay. So that's what I want to do is I want to go ahead and go sequentially, and I'm going to do it slowly so everybody gets a
I
chance.
have a question about the whole process.
Okay, so let's start with there first then. So let's just go ahead and do general questions or comments like I commonly do, and then I'm going to go sequentially through these. So Jeff, go ahead on a general question, and then Ruth, I'll come back to you again if yours was a more general question. So Jeff, go ahead, please.
So I have several questions. So if we put I understood that if we put projects in there, we were showing DWR that we had some ideas in mind for what we might work on. But like you said, we can drop some of those off later if we decide that they don't make sense for us later on. But does this also mean that we can add projects on that are currently not in the tier 1 and tier 2, for example? Or I think that's the way you phrased it. The first two groups. Like if there's something in the third group that we changed our mind and decided we want to move that up, or something that's not even on the list altogether, and we decide this December that we want to look into it, does this limit us from not doing that?
I can take that one. No, we're not really limited. This is really giving DWR our current best approach. The tiering is and grouping, that's all internal. That's just something we were doing as a way to organize this and to kind of draw the lines into where we were going to do this extra analysis. So the other projects are still in the GSP. We can absolutely add more projects later if we conceive of some. At the 5-year update, we'll have the opportunity to revisit this whole approach. We'll have a lot more information at that point, and we can add projects, we can eliminate projects. I'm sure we will eliminate many projects between now and then. And if new things come up that we hadn't considered or that are just different enough that we have more specific information, that's when we will be doing that. The real reason to include so many projects right now is in case funding over the next 5 years for project feasibility analysis wants us to show that our project that we're applying for grant funding for, say, is consistent with the GSP for the area. By including everything, we can say that we're being consistent and hopefully get some additional funds for some of this work.
Okay, I had a couple more comments. We didn't get the slide in the pre-information packet that came out. Is this going to be available on the website so we can review it later? This slide deck here?
I think it was on the website already.
Yeah, it was.
It's on the website. Okay, I guess it didn't get in the email. That's what it was. Okay, I didn't look on the website. And then the other thing is on the summary chart where you show the different projects and their costs and their operating costs. That's great chart. And it would be nice if that also included the acre feet per year and the dollars per acre feet per year as a couple extra columns. Those would be nice to have on there as a comparison.
Yes, we had talked about that, and we don't actually have the acre feet for some of these projects. It becomes very relative. So I'm hoping for what gets included in the plan, we'll have a little bit more refinement, but it might not be that level of detail.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, let's go to Ruth and then to Mark again. I want to stick on just general overarching comments right now, and then we're going to go project by project. Ruth, go ahead.
Yeah, my wish list includes cost per acre foot, like I think everyone's wish list includes. But lacking that, it would be really helpful to see those little sliders for each project on the same page with the overall price, just so we could get it in all one place. Mm-hmm. Another thing is something about who pays, particularly when we're talking about conjunctive use. Does that price include what Scotts Valley would pay to San Lorenzo for that money? Is that reduced from the overall price? And how does that all work in?
So Kirsten and Sarah, to that point, I mean, and to the point of some of the things that Kirsten said, and then the chart, the sort of you are here kind of chart that Sarah put up there. Do you all feel that there's even an estimate that can be made of a sort of a beneficiary pays kind of construct right now? Or do you feel, notwithstanding what Ruth's asked for, do you feel that that is premature and wouldn't necessarily be able to be defined more effectively until you get into CEQA?
I would say yes, the latter of what you said. The who will pay questions are going to probably fall under, at least at the very soonest, we need some more feasibility first. There's no point in arguing about who's going to pay for what when we don't know a project's even going to be feasible. So after that level, once we've had a little more understanding of how much it's going to cost, what the benefits will be, and who will be benefited, that's where you could even begin to have those conversations about who would be paying for what, and how those agreements would be made, or flexibility over time.
And for those of you that have not had a circumstance in a decision-making role to be administering or approving the CEQA document, I mean, one of the variables that CEQA's got to identify is impacts, cumulative impacts, and impacts takes the form of benefits as well as negative conditions too. So that's where that literally gets documented out and disclosed.
Yeah.
Let's go to Mark again, and sticking right now for overarching general questions.
Yeah, the comment is general. We see a project cost for each one of these, and you're giving us a relative benefit on that bar chart. I'd like to see you convert that relative benefit to some metric. Use a scale of 1 to 10, 1 to 100, so that we could then put cost to benefit and see with each one of these projects what's a relative cost benefit ratio. And it's not absolute, but it's going to be then a means to compare from project to project. What's the cost benefit ratios?
Kirsten, so you've heard Director Smalley's comment just now. Is that, from a consultant perspective, is that something that you can do? Is it something you're comfortable doing?
At this point, I don't feel that the data is refined enough to give you an accurate chart. It's going to still be orders of magnitude. So putting those numbers, the assumptions that would go along with that would make it, the level of error could be extreme. I wouldn't feel comfortable at this point doing that. I think that that is a great suggestion. But I think that the projects need to be further defined. And at this point, it's just a matter of, should we include all the projects for further analysis?
But you're already throwing out costs, relative costs for these projects.
With an extreme contingency, and
Right.
they could double or half.
I understand that. It's only a relative measure from project to project then for us to be able to say of these, I'm guessing at a number here, of these 12 projects that we're considering or looking at, which is the highest on a cost benefit perspective versus which is the lowest.
Yeah, I understand what you're asking for. I think that part of the problem is that we don't even have defined how much water would be produced or supplied for some of these. So those benefits are ambiguous too.
So Mark, let me check in with you on it. What you're seeking to get in terms of the metrics. What, above and beyond the data, is there a specific interest of your constituents or interest of the GSA writ large that you're trying to make sure is getting served with the suggestion?
We're seeing an awful lot of data of projects. All I'm trying to do is rank these and see a ranking of them. And since there has been a relative benefit that you've already scaled for some measure, I thought that was possible. It's not essential to the GSP, but I think it would be of interest to more than the directors and probably the public, since I don't think that this is going to be an easily understandable plan once we get it all put together.
Okay. All right. So we will continue to work on that suggestion based particularly on the interest statement you just made. Let's go to Doug and then to Jeff, again, staying in general terms right now before we go into the project specific ideas? Doug, go ahead.
Thanks. This may help expedite things a little bit, but I thought I pretty clearly heard from Sierra, and I agree that, we're not in a rack and stack mode at this point. It's just way too early in the process. What we're trying to do is generally define what the playing field might look like as we move forward and make sure we have a reasonably exhaustive list. I would propose that in this first 5-year period, we take as our goals to, number one, develop some effective cost effectiveness measures, which I think we've heard from a number of directors, but again, we don't have the data now. We need to develop the metric, and then we can aspire to have the data to be able to support the metric, so that during that 5-year period, we can start doing some racking and stacking, and that we also then develop the framework for an adaptive management structure that'll allow us to pick and choose among these things and weigh them off against each other. I would note that the cost effectiveness measures probably need to be relevant to the indicator against which we're trying to address, right? It's going to be a little different for base flows than it is for groundwater in storage, potentially.
Okay, thank you, Doug. And Doug just touched on something. This has nothing to do, Mark, with the metrics, the metric request that you just made about metrics related to cost effectiveness. But something I was going to say earlier in response to an answer that Sierra was making. We've talked about this a little bit before, but very deeply embedded in Sigma is exactly what Doug just said, which is a very, very consistent theme of adaptive management. It lives and breathes in Sigma in a variety of ways. It's tied to the local control factors. It's also just tied to the flexibility factors. It's tied to the annual and every 5-year reporting factors. It's built in there because the authors of the legislation understood that there was, and then even learned further once Sigma started getting enacted, in some cases really fairly critical level of lack of characterization or lack of understanding or knowledge that had to be gained as a means to then do some of the further planning. So what Doug just said, I think, is quite accurate. We'll rely heavily on adaptive management. Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quickly, the cost benefit curves. So those are logarithmic and they're just orders of magnitude. How many zeros are behind it as you move to the right?
Are you talking about the sliders?
Yeah, the sliders. Those are
that's somewhat more scientific, I think, than our approach, which was to try to figure out about how relative to the other projects they all fit, and not really taking into account anything such as useful life of a project of this type, really the operations and maintenance, or even huge constraints like the supply security of the initial water source. So it's not quite that fancy, but yes, I would say orders of magnitude is the way to be looking at it.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other general questions or comments? All right. We're going to now transition into the project specifics. So I'm going to ask that we just literally kind of scroll through. So starting with project 1, as indicated on the screen, are there any questions or comments that any board members would like to make? All right, hearing none and seeing none. I'm going to move fairly quickly here just for efficiency purposes. Thank you. Project 2, any questions or comments that folks would like to make? All right, let's continue then, please. Project 3, any questions or comments? All right, continuing on, thank you. Same question.
Just one, I'm sorry, I couldn't unmute in time.
Was this for 3 or 4, Chris?
It was for 3.
Okay.
It seems like if you go all the way down, so this is SLV and Scotts Valley and Loch Lomond. If you go to individual project cost summary page, and it's contained somewhere in there, but I don't see the treatment. not that one. It's the, keep going. Zip,
Is
zip,
it-
it is 22 of 44.
It's one of the hidden slides here.
Oh, okay. Anyway, it just, I guess it's that one right there. Conveyance and piping and interties. It doesn't say a treatment facility because I think you have to treat that water. Because I don't think we just take it out of Loch Lomond and use it.
I believe the idea for this is that it would be treated at one of the existing treatment plants.
Okay, that would be
They
great.
originally cut it in and then we took it out for that reason.
Okay, I always heard we had to build a new one, but that'd be great if we could do.
It might involve upgrades to existing treatment plants.
Okay.
I think that.
It does involve an upgrade. It does involve an upgrade.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Then bopping back to project 4, I think is where we were.
There we go. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Questions, comments? All right, continuing on, please. Five. All right, continuing on, please. Questions, comments? Yes, go ahead, Gail. You're muted, Gail, I'm sorry.
I apologize. I actually had a question on the one before, and it kind of addresses, it's a question that comes up in some of the subsequent ones, which is that Santa Cruz is providing water for a variety of things, which will be a huge benefit for Scotts Valley and a little bit less for San Lorenzo Valley. But it's not clear to me, for example, if in some of these cases, Santa Cruz is going to charge for the water that they're sending up there and where that comes out in this, or whether there's some agreement that Santa Cruz gets about, they get to draw a certain amount out if there's a drought, or so it's kind of like what I'm sort of asking. I feel like there's kind of an 800-pound gorilla in the room, which hasn't come out really before, which is that Santa Cruz becomes a very important part, a very important player in many of these projects, and we haven't really discussed their role and what the benefits are for them in many of these projects, whether it's direct payment for water or whether it's the fact that they can store it and take it out later. So it's sort of a general question about this project and others.
Yeah, I think that is an excellent point, and it's something when I was talking about the earlier in my presentation, when I was talking about the social and the political feasibility of some of these, if Santa Cruz is providing the water, they're not going to provide it for nothing. They're either going to need to get money, or more likely they're going to need to get supply security for their customer base. I think that is a very realistic expectation and something that benefits everybody if the projects are done well. So you're right to point that out. I think that is a real consideration and something that we are not going to have figured out between now and July when we have to have this.
Yeah, it only really figures in if there's going to be a per acre foot charge that one could understand that Santa Cruz wants for the water transfers over to the El Pueblo site in Scotts Valley.
Yes, absolutely.
It's not included right now, right?
Right. All the partners in any of these projects would really all have to be happy with the outcomes of it for it to even get to the feasibility stage. So yes, thank you for pointing that out.
Thanks, Sierra.
Doug, it looked like you were wishing to weigh in, perhaps as the Santa Cruz representative. So, or not, Doug, did you still want to?
I thought better of it.
And actually, David, if you don't mind, I would just like to say something that when I saw this come out, this projects list, I was really happy. I mean, I realize it's a beginning step, but you've started the way I think the board has been wanting this for the last few meetings, and so when I saw it, I was I was really happy. And, you know, don't feel bad that people are asking for more information. I think this is a really important step, and I thank you for that.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, and I, to be clear, I had, other than helping advise on presentation, I had nothing to do, thank God, in any of the work that was done here. But I will tell you for the board's knowledge that the consultant team and some staff, I mean, a lot of people put a lot of work into this, trying to pre-think, recognizing it wouldn't be perfect. So even like the toggle, like the bars, knowing that, you know, to Jeff's question, was there a scientific basis? I think a lot of times staff was thinking, can we try to pre-think what some of the things that are going to be asked? Are we going to disappoint people if we don't try to present some things, even if we know they're imperfect? So board members, for whatever it's worth, I want to give a shout out to your technical team that they really did try to do that. So Gail, I'm sure folks appreciate your saying that. So, all right, continuing on, project 6. Anything folks want to say? All right, continuing on, 7. Anything?
I would just like to say I was shocked at how you can do double the water and only increase the cost a small amount. This one was the most, like, it's not really counterintuitive, but I was like, wow. That's like, why would you spend 94 and get 750 when you can spend 107 and get 1,500?
So this lends to the comments about having the cost per acre foot. This is exactly why it makes it very complex. It's not straight line back of the napkin math, because there's a base cost and then it gets cheaper as you produce more water. So thank you so much for pointing that out.
And I would also say one of the problems with cost per acre foot is if it's often expensed over 20 years, like an accountant would.
Yeah, we don't know.
Over 50 to 75 years, because those systems, if they're built properly, or at least the anticipated life of the, you know, the system. But anyway, I digress.
Let's go to Gail.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted, since several of these projects involve injecting at the El Pueblo site into the Lompico Formation, I want to ask what information do we have about the fact whether this will work? And the reason I ask is that we have yet to see the data that was preliminary data that Santa Cruz, I guess, has done in trying to inject water into the Purísima Formation. And the Lompico is a semi-consolidated sandstone. And as far as I know, most of the injection projects and ASR projects involve unconsolidated, usually alluvial kinds of deposits. And so there's the question of whether, one, you could just get it in. And then there's a second question of, in the ASR project at the end, of whether you can get it out without having, for example, as I guess they did in some of at least one of the Brett's wells, they had arsenic contamination because of the EH and pH changes that you cause in the aquifer by injecting water that's different from the resident water in the aquifer. So this to me is a major question mark, is whether, you know, whether this will work, and how are we going to test this before we start down the road of spending, you know, over $100 million on something.
Sure, reasonable question. Let's go to Perrette and then to Rosemary to respond.
Oh yeah, this is to respond to Gail. Those kind of questions the staff is facing at various phases of the projects. So pilot projects, of course, if we're talking about something of that scale, we would have to consider. But Scotts Valley Water District, we have done 2 rounds of feasibility study, and at least on paper or on that groundwater model, we have used the model for that to look into how much water could be injected, when, what's the frequency, what's the rough locations, and how would the basins or aquifers respond to that. So we do have some very preliminary studies done on that.
That's what I was afraid of, that when I read about the experiments, they were actually modeling experiments. They weren't real experiments. And And of course, one of the major problems is you can calculate what the permeability should be in theory on these things. But what has been observed in ASR wells is that with time, basically the sandstones, they tend to get silted up with stuff, and so the permeability drops off pretty dramatically, even in unconsolidated things, and so then you have to flush the wells. And so I'm just, I think that before we get very far along in these, we really, I don't know how to do it. Maybe Mark or somebody who has more experience with wells, or or those of you that do this, is we've got to figure out whether this will work, whether we can put that much water in the ground consistently. I mean, it will work initially, but whether after a year it will continue to work. And then the other question of whether we can get water out that is drinkable for the last scenario of the ASR.
Good, thank you, Gail. Yeah, excellent, absolutely excellent points. Rosemary, you were in the queue, and it looks like you pulled yourself out. Is that
there? Maybe Regina wants to answer me.
Quick point of order. Rosemary was still in the queue. I accidentally lowered her hand for her. That's my bad.
Okay, so let me go to Rosemary first and then to Georgina, because that was the queue. Rosemary, go ahead, please.
So I apologize, I don't have my camera on, but I just wanted to mention that we have a very detailed multi-phase analysis that's been going on in the Purissima, the Mid-County Basin, since about 2016. And the phase 1 work was quite detailed, with a number of sort of paper exercises, hydrogeochemical analyses, looking at using borings and core samples and doing some actual benchtop analysis of that. And then also a multi-stage aquifer storage and recovery pilot testing. And that work has been completed a couple of years ago in one of our Belts wells, and is ongoing at the moment in a second Belts well. Also, I just wanted to comment that the documentation of the results of our work in the pilot testing are in our quarterly reports to our Water Commission. They're available online. That's called the Water Supply Augmentation Strategy. And they are done, I think we had the last one was in April, so you could find them on our website. And we'd be happy to answer questions. Yes, we have had some issues with arsenic. The current test that's going on with the Belts 8 is looking at some additional evaluation of what we saw, and to see whether or not we would see that on an ongoing basis. So there's quite a bit of work. It's a very structured process, and it is a multi-year process of both paper exercises and other kinds of analyses to make sure you have appropriate metrics for what injection rates are and extraction rates are that make a successful project, and then pilot testing. And we're in the pilot testing phase in that aquifer at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Rosemary. Georgina?
Gail, there are also some other agencies that are injecting up and down the coast. And one is Soquel Creek Water District, and they've done a piloting study. I know the field studies are really the best ones. The ones that you're hearing about modeling and paper kind of desktop studies, those are just for the agencies to decide, do they want to throw that amount of money at it to do the pilot testing. I mean, it's baby steps as they go. And we're learning from, in Monterey, they're doing it at the Pure Water Monterey. They're injecting into the Santa Margarita, and they have for years, because of they inject Carmel River water into the Santa Margarita. Now they go, and the Santa Margarita in that area is quite different to what it is in this basin. It's much more consolidated and it's confined. And then, Soquel Creek Water District is injecting into the Purissima as well. So, we keep an eye out on all of these, and actually Montgomery's working in all of these basins. And so, we do know what's going on there. We kind of know the pros and cons. And And so rest assured, I don't think they're gonna, these agencies, they're the ones that decide whether they want to get even to the pilot project stage. So, and if the pilot project doesn't work out, well, it doesn't work out, back to the drawing board, really, I think is how it goes.
That I'm happy to hear that, because it means we can sort of benefit from their knowledge.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, great question, Gail. Thank you. Okay, next project, number 8. Kirsten, you there?
Sorry, I missed the. So yeah.
Okay. Comments, questions? All right, continuing on. Comments, questions? Okay, continue, please.
That's it.
That's it. Okay, so we have, yes, Gail, go ahead, please. You're muted, please. Gail, you're muted. And you're still muted. Gail, you're muted. Gail, you're muted.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We don't have any group 3 listed here, and I realize that those are things that we don't want to take the time to do this analysis on, but do you have another group of projects that might be considered? I mean, for example, Jeff Koopman had an idea that we didn't explore, but was kind of interesting. And
So all of the group 3 projects are in the packet. There's an extensive project list in there that lists every single group 1, every group 2, and every group 3 project. And Director Koopman's proposal is in the group 3 projects right now, as we were instructed by the board to put it in there. So that's there, and they're all available in the packet.
Right. All right, Kirsten, can you go back to slide 5, please? Thank you. So as had been stated by Sierra at the outset, that one of the things that was already being discussed in advance of this meeting tonight, and as also then addressed by Perrette, just to put some reasonableness factors on cost implications, is whether or not there would be benefit to have a workshop, a PMA workshop. So as Sierra indicated, this is what I'm circling back to now. It's a key question. You've heard Sierra and Kirsten talk about a couple of times here, both proactively and then in response to questions. We know what we know, and have tried to put forward what's known at this time. Now, admittedly, that doesn't cover some of the more nuanced things, like to the point that Gail was making and that folks were answering about. There's data that can be extrapolated from other efforts, but those are pretty project specific. So the question is really, at this point in time, do you as board members want to support putting forward the effort to do a special PMA workshop for a deeper dive? As Perrette spoke, there would be costs associated with that. There'll be planning associated with that. So I want to go ahead and open up the floor and then kind of close out with an overarching question. Do board members support doing a workshop, both a workshop for you all's behalf as board members, and then a workshop for the public as it states? So I want to open up the floor. Does anybody want to speak at this time in support of doing a follow-on workshop on PMAs? Or conversely, do you feel like, okay, the ball's rolling and you've shown us what you know, and let's keep going? Jack, go ahead.
Yeah, let me ask, as we move along and we have a draft sustainability plan, the whole plan, couldn't we have the same discussion at that point with the community, or are you suggesting that we may change what goes into the plan? It seems like either way we'd be getting feedback from the community. So I recognize we'll be talking about more than just the PMRs, but what about just doing that as we do the rollout and ask for community input?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be reasonable. I don't, the idea of a workshop at this point in time, correct me if I'm wrong, Sierra, is not as a further sort of testing of the viability of PMAs to include or not include into the GSP. It was particularly regarding public sentiment. It was more just to leave open an opportunity for further discussion, further Q&A, and you know, public awareness if that's something to be pursued. Sierra, am I saying that incorrectly?
That's correct. You know, we know, we've been hearing, staff's been hearing the board say month after month that this is something that you're very interested in, and we want to make sure that we're giving you every opportunity to think about this and talk about this with staff. You know, we aren't going to have a lot more to talk about, but we could create the opportunity, the space to have conversations that get more into detail. Maybe they'd help inform what goes into section 5 a little bit if we don't have much more information about 4, which is to the point Doug had made earlier about what does the next 5 years look like. But there will also be lots of outreach when the draft plan is released, and we will probably talk about the PMAs fairly extensively with the community at that time, if that's something that we hear interest from the community about.
And of course, we'll be talking about them as we move ahead and start thinking serious about doing projects and choosing them. So most of my questions are really all about, and I think from others who I know would be about, you know, the cost, and we've kind of touched on that, and the magnitude of some of those potential costs and how we pay for them and who pays them and all those things. I think those are things the community would be very interested in, but I think we're quite a ways off from that.
Yep.
Yeah, and before I go to Mark, I mean, and again, I want to be very clear, it's not an advocacy for or not. It just, again, the question needs to come to you as a board, because there are cost implications of just conducting a workshop. There's cost implications for agency staff. There's cost implications for the technical consultants. It's probably not out of the realm of, I don't know, $7,000 to $10,000 when all is said and done, when you start cumulatively collecting the various, you know, putting a new presentation together, scheduling the time, doing the outreach. I mean, it adds up. So it's just something you need to weigh in on as board members. Let's go to Mark and then to Gail.
What we've seen tonight is what I believe that the board has been asking for the last several months. And Sierra, I think I did hear you say, I don't know what, how much more we could say, or we don't have that much more to say. So at this point, no, I don't see the need for a PMA workshop. I think it's still too premature to take this out to the general public, in agreeing with what Jack has just said.
Well, and I really appreciate hearing that you are satisfied that we gave you what you've been asking for, because that was what we were hoping to do tonight. But we definitely wanted to leave the door open, knowing how important this was to the board.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Let's go to Gail.
I guess I'm just saying ditto to what Mark said, but also these are very large numbers that are going to create a lot of sticker shock with the public. And, you know, until we have a better handle on who pays with what, I can just imagine people in San Lorenzo Valley will be saying, well, who pays for this? And, you know, how much of it is our share versus Scotts Valley versus Santa Cruz? And until we have more information about that, I don't want to. So as long as, you know, as long as I'm given permission to, you know, call you up and or Perret or Rick, you know, to ask more specific questions, I think that's enough for me.
Yes, and of course the board will be have the opportunity to review the GSP sections, so there will be plenty of time to ask questions.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, you had your hand up and then it went down, so I'm just going to check in with you. Jeff Koopman.
Well, yeah, I did. I wasn't going to comment on having the workshop. I'm fine with having it or not having it. But it was another more general thing I was going to say.
Okay, let me just stay on the workshop for a moment, and then Jeff, and I'll come back to you. So at this point in time, we've heard a number of people sort of asking some questions, and I don't hear any board members coming forward strongly advocating for workshops. So I just want to test that one last time. Are there any? And are there any board members that want to advocate for a workshop to be constructed? Okay, seeing none and hearing none, then we'll assume at this time that the summary of comments that Mark and Gail and others have said is that this is accomplishing, at least initially, what you've been hoping for. So now with that, I'm going to go back to just sort of general comments. It sounds like Jeff's got some comments, and then I want to open up the floor for the public, and then I think we'll be getting near closing out this document, this topic. Jeff, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so as I recalled, when the vote was taken on the advanced in lieu project that I described, I thought that the vote was whether or not it was going to get studied with the model runs right away by Georgina. And I think that we voted no, not to study it right away, to only study the in lieu. But what I was surprised to see it go down in group 3, which is a never study group. And I would like to see if any of the other board members have interest in maybe promoting it back into group 2, where it might at least get looked at by staff and considered as a possibility. You know, they could do some comparative cost analysis, because it's supposedly a low cost way of providing some water.
Sarah, you wish to respond to that?
Yeah, sorry, Jeff. My understanding was that it wasn't just the model. It was there's a lot we'd need to figure out with the project in terms of how exactly you would get the water out, where exactly you would be putting it back in the, well, how the operations of that project would work. So it will take, I'm not saying that we couldn't do it, but just if the board's going to be making a decision on whether they want to do advanced studies right now before the GSP is out, you know, that's a lot of work for the consultants to put together. It doesn't mean that we can't do it. Maybe Georgina's got some thoughts on that. I see she's got her hand up. So yeah, Georgina, why don't you?
Georgina, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jeff, that's the project that you, as I understood it, that you described is more operational way of using the in lieu and the timing and things like that. In general, the concept is the same as the in lieu. The amounts of water are still the same as what we have modeled. It's more how it's operating, the operational differences compared to others, and it's not very different. And so that's why in my mind I kind of group it with that. You know, that is the way that you describe that you can use the Santa Margarita. That is the only part that's probably more different, and you know, that's something you would need to convince those people using that Santa Margarita of more than this agency, I think. So talking to San Lorenzo Valley Water District is and trying to get them to change or to look into this changing operations might be a quicker way of doing it than you know, we have the next 5 years. There is the implementation plan that we're going to be doing section 5 of the GSP. So that is something that we can, those projects that haven't been modeled now, there is a chance to model those things later down the line. If they're, you know, we'll put them into the implementation plan.
I also want to add one quick thing, that the group 3 projects aren't the projects that we're not saying that we're not going to study them necessarily. They're just, we haven't studied them yet, so we didn't have any information to put in the, to fill out the plan with, to come up with the cost estimates for. So don't think that it means that it's off the table in any way.
Right. All right. So let's go to Perrette, and then I want to be cognizant we are already pushing yet again a 4-hour meeting, and we still have some remaining items to do that are beyond section 2 of our agenda. So I want to get us to closure. So let's go to Perrette and then do one more round, see if there's any public comment, and then ideally close out section 2. Perrette, go ahead.
Just to add on to what Georgina and Sarah already kind of touched upon, none of the feasibility studies or deeper analysis has been done by Santa Margarita Agency. It's been done by the respective water districts that have been considering those projects or implementing those projects. So I think that's something that needs to kind of be factored into the work plan for either member agencies or this agency in the future. And it's a great point. It's in the plan, and we should figure out how we move forward in, I think, section 5, Sarah, you mentioned.
All right, great. Thank you. Okay, with that, I want to go ahead and just check in, Nick, with your assistance. Any members of the public wish to comment on the PMA presentation or at all?
Yep, one last time here for this item. If any members of the public want to comment, go ahead and raise your hand. Again, if you're calling in via phone, it's going to be *6, *6. Seeing none.
Okay, with that, I want to thank all the members of the consultant team, all the board members for the robust discussion tonight on these multiple items. And with that, Chairperson Perry, I am handing it back over to you.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Let's move along. We have no consent agenda. We have no administrative. The only staff report we have is the financial report for the period of January 1st to March 31st. Anyone have any comment on that? Hearing none, do we want to ask for any public comment on that, Nick?
Yep, one more time, members of the public, if you have anything to say about item 5.1 on tonight's agenda, that's the financial reports for Q3 fiscal year 2021. This would be the time for that. Again, go ahead and raise your hand. Seeing none.
Okay. And then compliance, any comments? There's a little compliance. I see a yellow thing there. Or are we so far so good, staff?
Yeah, I did receive the delinquents on that. We're 100%. It's just
Okay.
reflected in the agenda.
Excellent. All right. You see the future items. There's no items of interest. I love that. Individual doing. I don't see individual direct reports. I think we're done. Stick a fork in us. We are done. We did it again. Thank you, everybody.
Motion.
A motion. Yes. Thank you, Eden. And
Second.
Okay. Thank you so much. And okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Georgina. Thank you, everyone else. I'm blanking on names. I'm a little dizzy right now, but great to see everyone and look forward to it next time.
It takes a village.
Adios. Yep, it does. Certainly does.
Thanks,
Thanks
everyone.
all.
Bye.
Good night, all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.